Let me introduce the panel that I will moderate, and I think Ugo Bassi you have already seen. Next to him is Jean-Paul Zervé, the chairman of the FSMA here in Belgium, but also of IOSCO. Verona Ross also already has obviously right now delivered her speech. Next to her, Nicolas Beer, Vice President of the European Parliament. And next to her, Thomas Borg, Executive Board Member of Deutsche Börse. And maybe I will sit down in a second. I think Ugo and Verena have spoken. I would probably ask Nicolas Beer to give a view a little bit on the state of play of Capital Market Union. Where do we stand with this CMU project? It is very ambitious. Today, I think there's the Council Working Group of MiFIR and very much down in the detail. We heard in the morning from Rodrigo Bonaventura more about what Europe needs to do to attract companies, to attract retail citizens, to invest in markets, and to finance sustainability, digital transitions, etc. Where do we stay in your view, and what do we need to do?
This will become a long speech then. No, maybe I just make some short points and taking up the last, or nearly the last sentence you had, to bring it in a broader picture. What we have to do, because yes, it's also about Capital Market Union, but I think we really have to make it in a holistic approach. And maybe 3 points. The first point for me is what we need more. I think we need more market, we need more transparency, transparency which is leading also to more competition. We need more equity, equity-driven. We need more investors, small and big ones. We need more listed SMEs. More innovation, innovation-driven actions, and we need more venture capital. What we definitely, and this will be my second point, need less, is less fragmentation, less bureaucracy, and less silo thinking. And that maybe leads to my third point, which is a little bit then of a consequence of that. I think we should more look on our continent, on our union, with looking it as if we did it from abroad. What is needed to be attractive? To be attractive for the brightest brains, to be attractive for investors, to be attractive to do business here, and are we really reaching this goal? And for the moment, I think we do not reach this ambition. There would be a lot to say also on the MiFID, MiFIR. But this is also one of those problems where we are only going for special interests and where we are only thinking in our silos and not in a holistic picture. And so maybe we come up for this in the later discussion. But you see, I'm very passionate about Europe. I'm very passionate also on the Capital Market Union, but I'm quite desillusionized on what we are doing for the moment. Because yes, we are now quicker under the impact of the crisis. A lot is now done, what we should have done 10 years before, but we are not really changing what is needed to be changed. And I would look forward if we could get more partners to change the real important things.
That gets applause because I think it was also passionate, and we said before we're all passionate about capital markets, but I think we really need to fix that as Europeans. We have a lot of shocks, certainly with geopolitics, with everything that's happening. Thomas, you come from a large market operator, the largest, I think, for market cap in Europe. What's the state of play of European markets, and what do we need to do?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much to be here. It's a particular pleasure to be here in the Hessen premises, Herr von Heusinger, and to be at the conference here organized by FESE. And I think Nicolas Beer hit it right on what is to be done. I listened to quite a number of speeches. We heard an excellent speech last night over dinner from not only the commissioner, but from David. And the sense you are getting is a lot of activity, a lot is being done, but a lot of skepticism that it will really, in the end, change the needle. And I think, just give me a moment and to briefly also reiterate, I know that's known where we stand, because I are close to the industry. I think the gap that we are seeing to the US capital markets is widening. If we look at the facts, there was recently an article in the FT. In 2008, the economy of the EU was slightly larger than the US. It was 16.2 trillion compared to 14.7 trillion. That was 2008. In 2022 now, the US economy has grown to 25 trillion. Europe is 19.8. Now the US is 1/3 bigger. If we take out UK, which unfortunately we have to, the US is now 50% bigger. And we can now draw it deeper. The 7 largest tech companies are US. There are just 2 European left in the top 20, which is SAP and ASML out there. And we could go on like that. We see now artificial intelligence coming, again, a topic that we risk of losing to the US. The mirror of that is that we see the same picture on the capital markets, that we are sort of declining at an accelerated speed, and the gap is widening. If we look at the IPOs, it was mentioned here several times, Europe has just 12% last year. If we look at the largest companies by market cap, Europe is at 60% of the GDP, US is at 200%, and that says something on the belief of where future innovation and growth will happen. And I think equally concerning, and that is in particular true for Germany, is the participation of retailers in Germany. It is at 18% of those who hold equities, and it is wealth destruction. People are sort of keeping their money in savings accounts. The DAX companies are by 70% owned by foreign investors. It is, in the end, losing wealth. So I think the overarching picture, we have now been through 15 years of regulation and of a lot of efforts, is that we have a gap widening, and I'm just making those points. I think we always need to be very aware that the Capital Markets Union is not something for the capital market, for the financial people and for the exchanges, but it is a key driver for the real economy, for innovation, and also for growth. All the large tech companies have grown on public capital markets, and it is also a social topic in terms of the wealth that people have. So, Nicola, I don't need to repeat that. What would have been in my notes, you said it all, what is needed, which is we need more liquidity, we need more transparency in the European markets urgently. We also need more equity-based funding and investments. We can't rely on bank funding anymore. And we need to ask ourselves, and then I hand it back, I think, any of the dossiers that we are now discussing, is that making the big change that is needed in terms of retail participation? Is it making the big change if we now look at the MiFID refit in terms of we're getting to more liquid, more transparent markets, which are urgently needed by the SMEs? And I think that also leads to the question then, what is needed next for the next Commission?
Jean-Paul, you are in the heart of Europe, as I think living in Brussels, being the regulator here, but you also look at all of this from a European perspective, obviously being in the ESMA board of supervisors, and you look at it from an international perspective. What's the state of play of CMU? Where do we need to go?
Well, thank you for giving me the floor. The question is, who is the person who had to give an answer? Is it the national supervisor? Is it the IOS co-chair? Only one salary, I would say. Or is it a member of the boss of ESMA? For ESMA, of course, I don't have the legitimacy to speak on behalf of ESMA. But no, I will give some comment, and being IOS co-chair means that I have to go to the point and to give the floor to many people. So I will try to be short. That's a real challenge for me. I think that if we want to be successful of CMU, we have to avoid to repeat the same mistake. Personally, I am a little bit fed up of the kind of, to see the same bad ideas coming back, I would say. if we want to be, sorry for being so brutal, not politically correct, but it has to be said, I would say. And if we want to be successful, and it's not a critic about other people, we need to think out of the box. And to think out of the box, it means that it would be a mistake to think that we can dream to European United States of America. America is another continent, so it means that market-based finance is something, I would say, in the roots of the American system. It's less the case. Does it mean that we don't have to make progress, to take initiative? Not at all. But you need to be realistic and to find solution to the real problem. For instance, can we avoid to come back with the permanent bashing against regulators? Okay? The problem is not about the cost of a listing. What we ask for a listing is spin-ups. Is spin-ups to what you pay to your law firm, to your auditors, and to the members of your banking syndicate. These are very important amount. What you pay for a listing is really peanuts. Then, if you want to be public, you need to think about it. I had the pleasure to discuss every week with a lot of successful CEO, CFO of listed companies. Yesterday, I was in a discussion with the board of Epenisha. I know it's Chacham rule, but I think that even the Chacham rule, I can say that whenever I speak with successful managers of listed companies, they agree with me. The question is not about the cost. If you want to go public, the question is, are you sure that you are able to manage the challenge? And what does it mean to be ready for this new world? What does it mean? It means that very frequently I have the pleasure to have discussion with excellent, brilliant entrepreneurs who start their startup, their joint venture. But most of the time, they are only, I would say, used to communicate whenever they have the possibility to do that in good time. When you go public, it means that you will have to communicate even if you don't like to do that, in good or in bad time, with frequency, about sensitive issue. And that's maybe one of the most important challenges, let us be clear, but because there is a lot of potential for that. Then, when you file for a prospectus, please don't think that I would be so pleased to receive 1,000 pages. I hate that. Once in my life, I had to screen a draft prospectus of 1,000 pages. I still try to understand what it means about the invoice sent by the lawyers, the bankers, the accountants, with 300 pages of disclaimer about their own responsibility. I am not interested at all to see if there is a link between Madame van der Leyen and the business model of this company. There is no link. What I would like to see, if there are risks to be put on the first pages. In Belgium, and I think that I may say that as national supervisor, not as member of the board of ESMA, and even not as IOS co-chair. What I required for all the people who would like to apply for a listing, focus on your business, okay? Do you have some warnings related to the specific business model, your equity and so story, tell that. I am not interested in other development, let us be clear. And I will give one other example. Euronext Brussels may be not the largest stock exchange at European level, even if it's part of the, I would say, the most important stock exchange platform at cross-border level. Even in a small market like Brussels, we have a valley of excellent companies with a business model about pharmaceutical product, bioscience. What's the business model of all these companies? Negative equity. No capacity to have a story about payout ratio because they don't intend to pay dividend in the 5 years. Okay? No positive cash flow. No profitability, and even no client. They are waiting for the famous license of the American FDA. But people know in what they are investing. They know there are risks. They know what's the business model, I would say. And I'm pleased to say to all of my students of the university, if you want to invest in real economy, don't lose your money in some crypto asset, but invest in the stock exchange, because there is a link with the financing of the real economy. But the price for this is to pay attention to the quality of information and to be ready for public. And I had the pleasure to see, if I may call it that, during the COVID crisis, we performed a survey. We're not the only one. In France, they do the same survey, with a sharp increase from new generation, young, retailed, and not frequent. Of course, they disappear a little bit after the COVID crisis, to be clear, and we know why. Huh? They thought that they buy low, and then, okay. But they were there. So it means that there are a lot of opportunity. And that's what we expect from decision maker, is that we are taking the initiative to do it. And for this, you need to have positive target. And that's the reason why I would like just to add one comment as IS co-chair. And the link is with sustainable finance. If we try, with interoperability, with the EU decision making, to find a common language in order to ask from hundreds of thousands listed companies to speak the same language about sustainable finance, it means more capacity to extract data, better quality, more quantity of data. And it means that if you want to attract retail investor to listed company, maybe there is also a story to explain about what you think about sustainable finance. Sustainable finance is also a fantastic incentive for the stock exchange to explain what we are doing is in compliance with ESG expectation. Of course, I would say citizens are very prudent. In Belgium, small country, we have 300 million of savings posted in the bank account, 300 million. But 200 for usage with all kind of labels and passport, you see 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it means that people accept to take risk from time to time, but it has to be explained and to avoid, I would say, the debate which are not the real one. That's it.
So I think a simple solution at the end, probably not complex to implement. And I think we heard all over the morning, I think a very common analysis, I think, of the state of play. We also heard frequently the words fragmentation, consolidated tape popped up here and then, liquidity, valuation, especially compared to the US, and probably it's good to shed a bit of light on secondary market. And I would first maybe pick on Verena, because I think you at ESMA are at the heart of, I think, issuing every year a very good report on secondary markets. And you said, I think when you talked a little bit, that the problem is creating less fragmentation, more liquidity. Your data strategy, I think, tries to bring more information easier to the people, but still we don't seem to really manage. And I think if I look a little bit at your secondary market report, it shows a high number of execution venues, etc. What is sort of your view on liquidity and performance of the secondary markets in Europe?
Thanks very much. I just wanted to add one thing, which I actually said yesterday evening at another venue, which is that we all talk about passion, and I certainly very much feel the passion for the Capital Markets Union, but I think it was Jacques Delors who once said, it's very hard to fall in love with the single market. And I think it's a bit like that for Capital Markets Union. You know, we all feel passionate, but it's quite hard to fall in love with. So just on that. For the secondary markets, I think you're right. What we see is that there's still a lot of fragmentation. And so for us, what is really essential is that we focus particularly on transparency and also on bringing the liquidity pools more together and making sure that there's information about where the liquidity is, encouraging more cross-border investment. I won't go into the consolidated tape. I'm sure you will want to come back to that later. Let me focus a bit on the transparency side. I think there are 3 points here. One is the double volume cap and the whole question, how do you create a market structure which actually fosters liquidity in the markets rather than moving trading to less liquid venues or places. And I think there it is very good to have maybe just a single volume cap, but I think we need to make sure the whole system of deferrals and things like that is less complex. We create less fragmentation and we ultimately drive more transparency in the markets. I think the other one is the SI regime and making sure that we ensure that where systemic internalizers play a role, and they have an important role to play in the markets, it's good to see that we actually have a clear criteria for when you can be a systemic internalizer with all the benefits that brings and when you can't. And there I have a slight worry in the negotiations now. We're going very much to a very qualitative regime, which will make it quite difficult to draw that distinction and line. And then finally, on transparency in non-equity and notably OTC derivatives. I think this is an area where I have some concerns that we are also moving backwards. And indeed, we saw it recently in the CDS markets. You know, we saw quite some volatility. We saw uncertainty about what's actually happening in the market. And again, I think we need to be careful to make sure we have the right transparency regime there.
Nicolas Beer, maybe on this. I mean, you're involved in the last round of the MiFIR trilogues and maybe addressing this question about single volume cap waivers, the SI regime. What's your view on that and hearing the doubts of Arena if that truly will achieve more transparency?
Yeah, I think to take the positive point firsthand is that, yes, at the end we will get less fragmentation, a little bit less fragmentation, but for me, the result is not worth all the time we invested in. Okay, it's not so easy when you come up with a not so quality proposal, and it is not becoming improved by Council and EP position. So what do you wait from the result? For me, for example, to start with the consolidated tape, we will not get really a version, if I see it now, which will come out now in the next hours, which will give the transparency I would have loved to have. And this for a lot of reasons. If the SIs are not in the tape, so what is the advantage? If we go for a real-time or pre-date tape, then and in the same time, but we have anonymized data on the places of the market. So, what's for? If we have, I think we should have had an approach going a post-trade tape, which comes next more and more and more, maybe to real time, but having the SIs in, having the transparency of all the markets in, and which then also would give us the advantage not to publicly now, as state, fix prices for data. The stock exchanges have to deliver and fix prices on which price this is then sold. Because this will then happen. And me as a Free Democrat, I have a big problem with that. I think it's not my position, it's not my role that I fix the price for data. You have to deliver, because this normally is your business model, and you are the Frankfurt Stock Exchange is very good in that, but all the other stock exchanges have their experiences, and there is a competition. Who sells what to whom, and how attractive such a stock exchange is. And now they will deliver it all in. The SI is not in, so there is no more transparency, and to protect a little bit, we anonymize it. So I, as an investor, cannot see the different prices by the tape in the different stock exchanges. So less competition, less transparency, a lot of costs. for me, it's not worth doing it in this form, but it will come up because it's the smallest base for interests of all the lobbyists who were around. But it's not the holistic picture to be attractive from outside investors and not attractive for our SMEs and other internal investors.
Thomas, you're going to be faced with it. I think from the market structure, if I listen a little bit what Verena said, and then I have to say, me personally, having been responsible for the market for many years, you know, that is something that concerns me. What are we going to do to European market structure with such a tape, with such an SI regulation, with such a waiver regime? What's going to be the effect on liquidity and ultimately valuations?
Yeah, and let me say I've now seen MiFID 1, I've seen MiFID 2, and now I see the MiFID refit. I can only say that in contrast to other regulations such as EMI or others, certainly they have not benefited the European capital markets, the equity markets. I think it is a regulation that is hardly manageable, and that has led to much less transparency, much less liquidity by fragmenting the markets. If we look at the SIs, currently the latest data is average order size is 11,000 euro, which is an average, so there are smaller than that, are executed outside the exchanges. It is clear that it is not large-scale orders or large institutional orders that are dealt on these markets. And if I look now, I think the topic is not even touched in the trilogue, transparency regimes. I can only say it's a wasted opportunity now to really make a change with the MiFID refit. I'm very happy, in contrast to others, to speak to the consolidated tape. I think it is no wonder that it draws so much attention, and it is unproportionate, I mean, as you said, to what it will actually deliver and what it will do. But it, of course, crystallizes the problem very nicely, because it again amplifies an unlevel playing field in the way it is designed. If now the discussion is around creating a pre-trade tape, then of course it opens up the use to sort of misuse it as a means to use it as a reference price for further dark trading or SI trading. And it's again, from my perspective, a bit a tragic tale of Europe that, of course, in the end, it will lead to the most complex, complicated, most difficult to deliver solution if you end up with a pre-trade, real-time, whatever, tape, where I would say start with a good thing that also really unites Europe and that does not further fragment. So all in all, you hear a little optimism, but hopefully there is another opportunity. But I think in the end it gets back to what Nicolas Baer said, to remind what is actually needed, what is the starting point, what do we need to deliver in markets. And I think the proposals that we now see will not make a big change to the better, if I may say so.
Ugo, you heard a little bit, there was not too much happiness on the transparency as well as I think what the tape will achieve. Will it be the magic bullet?
This is the charm of the European system, globally considered, is that there are really different opinions all over the place, and the final outcome of every negotiation is really a compromise between different opinions and different positions. Technically speaking, we do not share all the assessments which have been expressed in terms of possible consequences of a pre-trade tape as it is possibly going to be designed. As I said, I cannot express myself too much on what is going to happen tomorrow. I personally can subscribe to the idea that MiFID 1 and MiFID 2 have introduced some fragmentation, but at the same time they've opened up to competition. So it is something that we have tried to address in the last iteration of MiFID, in any event, of course, what's going to come out, in particular on the tape, but more generally on all the points which have been mentioned, is going to be a true compromise between different dynamics, Council on the one end and Parliament on the one end, but within the Council and within the Parliament there are also a lot of compromises which have to be reached between member states within the Council and between political groups within the Parliament. So, in a way, I would also love to be able to say, for example, that we can proceed, directly towards what is needed, and it's very healthy that everyone expresses his or her views of what should be the ideal world. Unfortunately, we are part of the bureaucrats apparatus which needs to be realistic and, of course, be accountable to the system, which is finding fragile, difficult compromises where everyone is equally happy and unhappy.
Thank you. Jean-Paul, maybe you're going to be faced with supervising this, so you will have a tape that will be available to the traders that obviously have the electronic means to consume the data in real time and will be able to know with 99% certainty what the price will be in a quarter of a second, and the retailer will not. How will that instill confidence for the retailer, and what will that do to the market, in your view?
Well, a couple of comments, if I may, about the consumer tape. I will disappoint you due to the fact that, of course, it's not a surprise. People like me are, I would say, most of the time involved from a technical point of view in rotating a presidency of the EU. And as you know, Belgium will be the last one before the general election. Good luck, by the way, I would say. So it means that I have to abstain from comment, because maybe either it's solved during the Spanish presidency with my colleague and friend Rodrigo on board, who was one of the keynote, or it will be, okay, our duty, our homework to try to find a solution, And for this, as stressed by Hugo, that will be a Belgium compromise. So, and what is a good Belgium compromise? Because there are also bad Belgium compromise. Let us be clear. Try to be objective. A good Belgium compromise, a compromise about something for which everybody is not happy for one of two things. That's the best one. If someone would be happy with everything, there would be something wrong in the machinery. And so that will be a pleasure again to work with Hugo, like it was the case with our wise man David, and with ESMA, of course, it was the case 10 years ago. But other aspect about transparency. Third, we have to admit, to acknowledge that the world changed, I would say, after the global financial crisis, subprime. Private finance is now another world, let us be clear, I would say. And that's the reason why we will release very shortly, I would say, our first report and survey about private finance at IOSCO level. That is the first thing. And I think it's important, because when we discuss about transparency, it means trust. Okay? From this point of view, and I know that not everybody will agree with me, MiFIR, it's an excellent new step. Let us be clear. For ESMA, but also for national supervisors, we now have the possibility to work with giant databases, which have been cleaned most of the time. So it means more capacity to extract data, more capacity to understand the market development, more capacity to fight against market abuse and absence of level playing field, and that's an excellent output of the open decision-making process. Not easy to manage. Some people are disappointed. It's a real big machinery, but there are also, and that has to be stressed from a positive point of view. The same for transparency about the public environment. I think that Verena was right to stress, I would say, the important debate about CDS. CDS, by definition, as usual, suspect about a crisis. The problem I have is that when I see what happens, I would say, in the banking area recently, you have a very, very, very limited amount of transaction, single name, on one listed company, and you know who it is. And if you have a look of the amount of transaction is very limited. Specialists know that. We know that it's about very opaque, illiquid market. You know that because you like to be here for occurrence organized by the FESE. But John and Mary in the street, political decision makers don't know that. So that there is a serious problem of absence of leveling play. And whenever you see an evolution, a sharp evolution, decrease of increase of CDS, you know what it means and you know what it's not a problem. But many people don't do that. So that's the reason we have to explain, to come back with fact-finding experience and to explain, because transparency is about trust. And there are many, many other examples for that, okay, in order to be sure that we are going the right direction. And that's the reason why I was so pleased to see a paper published by the European Commission about retail investor in strategy. Finance education, it's part. We have to explain what it means, I would say, a stock exchange, what it means diversification of assets. We are working in an open economy, and it has to be explained, and we don't have to think that the young generation is against that. And even the teachers are supportive of that. That's also, you know, part of my life as supervisor.
Thank you. Maybe, Verena, you were saying you wanted to comment something on the tape, because before you stopped at waivers. Anything you want to
No, I
add?
was just, in reaction to Jean-Paul, I was thinking, I hope we will not still be discussing the consolidated tape in the MiFIR review by the time it gets to the Belgian presidency. I'm sure the topic will remain on our agenda, but hopefully we're at that stage, at least in the implementation stage, of actually trying to make this work and make it work to really try to reduce the fragmentation that we clearly still have in the European markets. And that is a situation that we have to deal with, unfortunately. And I think what we can do and try to do is just try to deal with that fragmented environment in a way where at least we try to bring data and information together in a single place, whether that is through ESAB on the companies, whether that is through a consolidated tape. You can then discuss whether, you know, pre-trade at this point or not is a good idea, but I think the important thing is it is a starting point of bringing that information of this fragmented market together.
Any further comments on the secondary market before we move to the next round? No, then maybe, and please feel free to ask questions from the audience via the app. It will come to me, and happy to ask some at the end. I mean, maybe as a final round, we I think discussed a lot where we stand. And I think, Ugo, you were telling us of the very ambitious action plan that we've done. You alluded to the third action plan that may be coming up. Is it going to be as busy as this term? Is it going to be, and that was a little bit the input from David Wright yesterday over dinner, saying we need to concentrate on a few big things that really matter, that are ambitious, that we can deliver. And what would be those things, maybe, if you have any idea?
Thank you, Reinhard. No, yeah, well, first of all, we are, of course, reflecting internally. We are discussing, brainstorming, but of course it will be for the new commissioner to endorse any type of possible initiative that we would launch during the next mandate. If you want my personal opinion, and here I will put a disclaimer, these are personal opinions, we certainly would badly need some big, let's say, projects which would make a difference. The problem is always the same. The problem is the one that I mentioned before, is the possible political support for let's say, important and revolutionary initiatives. Because as I said, if we sometimes discuss for ages small little things and small little adjustments here and there, can you imagine a council and parliament as well discussing a big project, revolutionary project? Let's talk again about taxation. Rodrigo put it on the table. Of course, it would be lovely to be able to support capital markets union with a reform on taxation, but this is unanimity, so forget about it, or at least we should ensure some kind of political support, some political buy-in from the member states before we go out with the new big revolutionary proposals. And again, from my personal perspective, I didn't speak about supervision at all because I wanted to leave it with Verena. But I mean, of course, I mean, for me, like for many others, but again, this is very personal, and don't get me wrong, do not misunderstand me, this is not what's gonna happen. But of course, I see that the capital markets union with a fragmented supervision as it exists at the moment is certainly not a complete one. Verena and Jean-Paul and all the members of the ESMA are making enormous efforts on supervisory convergence, but they do efforts. What do they have in terms of legislation? I'm not pleading or will never plead in favor of a single supervisor, but I really feel that in some areas centralized supervision would be a necessary component of the single rule book and of the capital markets union. I know that this is a very touchy subject for some member states, but again, that shows that when the going gets tough, you know, the political problems explode. Thank you.
Jean-Paul, single supervision, good idea, and what are the other bold things we should be 2024 to 2029?
I feel at ease whenever I have the pleasure to go to Paris in the building of Arena. So I strongly believe in the current ecosystem, which means one single rule book and decentralized supervision. I'm not convinced that we need to go to Frankfurt for a copy and paste of SSM. And because we are speaking about, I would say, more fragmented market, we are speaking about different kind of behavior. When I have the pleasure to explain to my colleague, members of the board of ESMA, what are my priority of product supervision, I am not sure that they understand what I mean. For instance, as you know, in Germany, you have a very dynamic, self-regulated industry, Bourse of Stuttgart, about structured product. In many other countries, in France, in the Netherlands, they don't have. In the Netherlands, most of the time, retail investors invest in pension funds, life insurance. In France, they have a set of UCITS and the famous Livret A. So I would say the kind of product which is, I would say, proposed and appreciated by retail investors are not the same, even if you have a look on the difference between the Netherlands, Germany, France and Belgium. And I don't speak about the UK or the Luxembourg, which are bespoke ecosystem. So it means that I would say we are not speaking about the same business model. And that's normal because the history of the development of the banking sector is not the same. In Belgium, we have a lot of diversity between UCITS, banking product, structured product, I would say listed company. So that's the reason why we need, I would say, a single rule book, and it's more and more the case. And that's the reason why we need to be involved in I would say, structure of decentralized supervision, but with a strong aspect, let us be clear, of convergence. And that's the reason, and Verena, I think, can say that I am not exaggerating. That's a kind of element of language I'm repeating at every boss. If we want to believe in the current ecosystem of ESMA and EOPA, we need to say, first priority, it's supervisory convergence. If you are not on the same line about what we are doing at national level, it's mean by definition problems to be expected about forum shopping and absolute level playing field. Because the European passport is one of the most beautiful ID for the European spirit. But if it doesn't work, it means a disaster, because by definition the problem will be not in the home countries, but in the host. If you have a problem about the quality of a product with, I would say, a free provision of services or a use it label, the problem are not in the home country. The problem are for the host. The problem are for the host supervisor. And the problem are for the Minister of Finance when he had to receive a lot of questions in another parliament, not in the place where it was licensed. So it means home host is a difficult relationship, and we need for that a strong supervisory convergence. I can tell you, in Belgium, I would say, I would say, a very large team of inspectors on the field. Good news for them, they are not allowed to see me. They have to be there night and day in the banks engine. That's good for them. Okay? I have 40 professional members, 40, which is impressive. 10% of my budget. Okay? They are in charge for MiFID aspect, for MiFID 2, MiFID 1, IDD, everything you want. But I can tell you 60% of the budget is about what we are doing at ESMA level. So it means what we are used to call CSA, convergent supervision, change, I would say, the world for a national supervisor. And we are more happy to do that. The same for EIOPA, I would say homework. If we are not doing that, there will be a problem of credibility for Verena and for all the board members, because it means that we still accept that there are divergences between us about the quality of the supervision, the absence of level. That's the price to pay to have, I would say, to believe in the sustainable aspect of the current ecosystem, and I believe in this.
Verena, maybe to go on, 2024 to 2029, single supervision, what else are the big building blocks of a capital market union? And I think it will not be supervision alone, so please feel free to be bolder. And you got one question from the audience, and that is, how happy are you with the PFOF compromise?
Between all those questions, I could fill the rest of the time very easily, so let me try to be brief. Let me maybe start with the big topics for the next Commission. I think, as I said briefly in my introductory remarks, I think we need to look far more holistically, and we need to stop trying to just tinker, sorry, that's not a very nice word, with little bits of the system, but we need to think far broader, and for that we need, and I fully agree with Ugo, we need the genuine support of the political environment. That's the governments, and that means also some bold steps, including pension reform, that includes some of the taxation issues and others. To my mind, without that, I think we are not going to make this significant step change that we are looking for. On supervision, I think I would just say two quick things. One, I think as ESMA, I'm very proud to say, I think we've shown we can be an effective supervisor at EU level. We're doing that for certain parts of the system. It's still a very small minority. And I think realistically, we also need to be clear there will never be, for the whole of the remit of what ESMA covers, a single European supervisor. I think that, you know, this is not what I can see happening, certainly in the next 5 years and probably in my lifetime. Where, however, I think we need to focus more is where it's genuinely the cross-border aspects. Jean-Paul mentioned the issues around the consumer detriment that arises from cross-border business when it's not well supervised by the home supervisor. That is something where we need to ensure we have the right approach across Europe. We have powers when we needed to act. And the other thing that I would point to is the market infrastructure piece, where I just find if you look at some of the market infrastructures that are genuinely providing the services across the whole of the European Union, having then one specific national regulator supervising that, does that still work in the overall picture? So those were maybe the two things. And then on PFOF, I think you know, I look forward to seeing what the compromise is. I don't know where they currently are. I hope ESMA's position has been very clear. We have supported a ban, but I'm also conscious that that has led to some quite big pushback. So let's see. I'm waiting to see what the outcome is. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Nicola, I think I got a good question from also the audience, which was pretty much what I wanted to ask you. What role can national governments' best practices play in facilitating companies' entrance into markets and unlocking savings? And I think my question maybe would have been a bit broader than that. We heard a lot, member states need to be convinced. You're a politician. How do we get the three bold ideas through to governments to make capital markets work? What do we need to do as industry players, as citizens, as politicians in order to finally get something that is meaningful? And I think, you know, you said more and less, and there's a lot of lists of more and less, but how do we convince member states?
Oh, yeah. Maybe those two questions are a little bit different to see. I come back to the investor and enterprises point, but if you take your question in this form, let it put me this way. Maybe we have to challenge this way of interpretation of a good compromise, which was just mentioned, that a good compromise on European level is when everybody is unhappy. Because, I mean, at least here the supervisory authorities are happy, very good. I do not really see if, especially if you look at from the enterprise level, if this was the aim of the game. I would challenge it that maybe in the next term we more think about how to make entrepreneurship happy, how to make investors happy, how to make also retail investors happy, and not to be unhappy at the end. And maybe to take up the claim to think out of the box. Maybe we have to think out of the box in a form that we have trialogues to start with a project and not at the end. So maybe we have to have more trust in those who then get a mandate to act. So that Parliament, Commission and the Council are discussing beforehand which kind of mission and which level of ambition we have for certain questions to solve, and then have more flexibility in getting the project done, and at the end look if they got what they were mandated for. So maybe we have really to change the way we regulate. Also to think that regulation is only a tool to facilitate being an attractive continent and not a tool in such. Because, I mean, we all kept busy in small dossiers and files, and at the end, if you look on the broader picture, it doesn't fit in a coherent project. So I would challenge this for the next term. Happy to see it and happy to be also partner in these discussions, because I think we all know that what makes it attractive, especially when I take up the second point on the enterprises, this is that here, to work here, to find the best people to work with, to have the possibility also a certain security of my investment, to get back a revenue, because I'm doing it for the revenue, I'm sorry to say it so blankly, and not all the time the discussion about more complicated rules, more taxes. I was never asked from an entrepreneur for more taxes. Only discussion about subsidies, but not of a framework which gives you the opportunity for good ideas, more innovation, and really a business case. So I think to look more from this perspective would help. And just to finish, because I didn't mention it, but as Irina took it up on the PFOF, it's really a pity that we get a ban. It's a ban about a certain business model which makes it more expensive for retail investors to go to stock exchange. This will not help to have more equity-driven market. And if we can fix it with a retail investment strategy, I'm not so convinced for. I really will work on that. But I see that we bring out small investors from the market. And for me, this is really not the right direction.
Thank you. And I think a very interesting thought to really start with what is the ambition, what is the strategy, what is where we want to get to the goal. Thomas, last not least, 24 to 29, the state of play, we've analyzed. Where do you see us going, and what would you like to see in order to make your business grow?
Yeah, I of course closely listen to the public sector comments and shall not comment on the supervisory structure in Europe. But I think ESMA is doing a great job, Verena. But I think if we look now ahead, there are really huge challenges ahead of us in the transformation of our economy and in innovation and also in economic growth. I think, David, it's good to end with a quote from you. You said yesterday the European people are at least as good as the US people and others. I think we have the founders, we have the entrepreneurs and the innovation here. We just need to make sure that it stays here. Therefore, I think it is key that we focus on well-functioning capital markets and on good regulation that helps the purpose of capital markets that serve the real economy. And probably it's also sensible to really do some economic studies to have a clear picture of where we are going, because I think we lost a bit the compass in the past years of where we are heading. I think it is equally important that we are focused on also our sovereignty, right? I mean, Ugo, you said earlier we need to look across the channel. I don't think that looking across the channel is a blueprint for success. I think we can be much more confident here in Europe. We also should focus on having our own financial market infrastructure, on also having our supervisory control on euro exposures that is worked on in EMIR 3.0. I think these broader strategic topics are really important that we come up with a plan. And I also very much agree with you, Ugo, when you said it needs support from the heads of state. I mean, I can only say I think it is good if there is a sense of urgency, if there is a joint strategy, because it has to involve pension plans, taxes, and other topics, right? We can work on prospectuses till the death, but there are bigger topics, of course, that are very important in really revitalizing the equity markets in Europe, I think.
So I hear passion and also courage to be, I think, really, active in searching the solution that will deliver to EU citizen at the end. That's, I think, what we need to do. A great panel. Thank you very much. A big round of applause to all of you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session on strengthening the EU's primary markets. I have a very distinguished panel with me here. Far right, Anthony Attier, the Global Head of Primary Markets and Post-Trade, Euronext. To my immediate right, Tanja Panova, Head of Unit DG FISMA, European Commission. I worked a lot with Tanja in the high-level forum, which she kept us to the grindstone, as we say, and I hope we helped with the Commission's CMU program, but she did a great job. To my left, distinguished member of the European Parliament, Alfred Sand, who is the rapporteur on the Listing Act, who's been in the European Parliament for 9 years. We're going to be very interested in your report, of course, and the timing, whether the Commission's proposals can be agreed on time. To his left, we have Beatriz Alonso Mayagranzas Senamor, the head of equity, fixed income and market data at BME, that's the Bolsa Madrid Español, Mercados Españoles in Madrid. And to her left, Fernando Alvarez Cienfuegos, the Financial and Economic Counselor at the Spanish Permanent Representation here in Brussels, who's chairing the Council Working Group on the Listing Act. So actually we've got around the table here all the key actors. So I hope we're going to make immediate progress. Now, we're going to structure this panel in 3 parts. First of all, to hear from our industry experts about the situation in listing in Europe. How are we doing? When I look at the data, it doesn't look too good. We're seeing drifting towards the Atlantic, the other side of the Atlantic, IPOs going down, et cetera, what is going on? And we need to understand that before we discuss the Listing Act. And here I'm going to be turning to Tanya and to Alfred. Tanya will explain the Commission's proposal. Alfred will give the Parliament's view, and Fernando will tell us how far the Council is advancing. And then in the time we have, and we're all going to promise to be very crisp and short in our interventions, we're going to look forward and discuss, what are the key aspects of this, looking forward into the future, the key aspects to build this dynamic capital markets union that I'm sure we all agree on. So let's start, Beatriz. Looked at from where you are, how do you see the primary listing markets in the European Union and also in Spain?
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think we have been hearing a lot of points this morning around regulation, the situation of listings, but I think it's good to remind where we are, what we do, because we have some positive points that I think we have to put in value. So, for example, let's keep in mind that the markets are a very, very effective source of financing in terms of capacity, in terms of pricing, in terms of timing, and they have done so such a good work even during very, very complicated times, for example, the pandemic or the current geopolitical situation or economic situation. So in terms of, we have less IPOs, but as well we have a lot of capital increases that are a good sign that we are there and we are efficient. Let me give you some specific numbers. I'm focusing on the SMEs that have been as well on the table today on the different discussions. So for example, on the SME market we have in Spain, the BMI growth, we have some data for the 2022 in terms of how the markets contribute to growth of the companies and to the job creation. So for example, last year, the companies included in the BMI growth had an increase in turnover of 34%. In terms of the EBITDA, they increased in a 30%, and the workforce increased as well by a 24%. So again, this is a good sign that we are doing things and that we are there. Maybe I will add very briefly some of the points. It's important to remind that the markets are not only for certain types of companies. We want, or we are able to have all the types of companies, bigger, smaller, more traditional, innovative, mature, not so mature. So we are there for all of them. There is as well a fear of losing control by some of the companies that may think about being listed. It is not the case. Being listed, it does not mean to lose control. In this term, for example, the measures around, for example, the multiple voting shares can help in this sense. Around maybe the debate around US, Europe, we have to take a look at the liquidity. In general terms, it's not always the case, but in general terms, the liquidity remains when the home country, where the home country is. This is very relevant to have it in mind. There is, in part, this is because we have a relevant weight of international clients or investors. It's not only that we are local markets, we are very international. This is something that sometimes we may lose the point on. Again, the presence of financial analysts, even if we have to do things on research, we have to still do more effort on this side, but there is a high number of financial analysts, again, related to the proximity to the company and its home country, so relevant again. And it's not only being listed, it's not only the ringing the bell and that's all. We have a value-added kind of services, the training, the corporate events in which we can contribute to the companies, we can accompany the companies, and lately the visibility. So maybe I will stop here, and for sure we will have an opportunity to see some measures in a later stage.
Just tell us, I mean, in Spain, Beatriz, I mean, you've got a good pipeline of future prospects coming through. I mean, living in Madrid, it doesn't feel too bad, the economy. I mean, are we seeing some new dynamic European, Spanish and potentially big European companies developing? Is that where we are, or are you pessimistic?
Let's see. We have to see on let's distinguish a little bit between the main market and the BME growth again. So in terms of main market, we have some companies in the pipeline from now to the end till the end of the year, but maybe we will have to see how the economy evolves. In general terms, the international economy evolves. But again, on the BME growth, for example, we have a good pipeline. I think that we have already 4 companies already listed this year, 18 last year. So it's a good point.
So, Anthony, tell us your perspective on the primary markets. What are we seeing here? Are we seeing a permanent negative trend? Is it cyclical, or how do things look like from Euronext in Paris?
Euronext in Paris, Milan, Lisbon, Madrid, Oslo, Brussels, Dublin, Amsterdam. No, look, so talking with my Euronext hat, so we represent 7 markets in Europe. Some of them are large markets, like in Italy, in France, in the Netherlands, in Norway as well. And some of them are rather small, in Belgium, Ireland, and Portugal. So we see the different flavors of the current macro trend. We also have invested to attract non-domestic companies in Europe. For instance, we have an office in Madrid, and outside Europe, where more and more we are pitching against Nasdaq and against US exchanges for international companies. I'm not saying we're winning against Nasdaq, but I'm saying that after Brexit, we're not pitching anymore against LSE. We're pitching against the US exchanges. So that also gives you the trend that we see in the newspapers almost every day about the gloomy mood of the city of London in terms of IPO. I think the conversation they have are much more with a sense of urgency than the one we're having here. And that's not necessarily a good thing for us long term, obviously, because it's more fragmentation, obviously. But the city of London looks at its market as just the UK market and not the gateway to Europe anymore. And we are the gateway to Europe as stock exchanges for capital market. So indeed, the trend doesn't be great from an IPO and a new listing point of view. Nevertheless, at Euronext, we're not that pessimistic because we see a good pipeline in some countries such as Italy, for instance, France with SMEs, the Netherlands with larger caps, and this continuous pipeline of companies in Norway as well. So indeed it's a downside of the cycle for sure, but I wouldn't be so pessimistic about the future. Now, there are very negative factors to take into account. The market volumes have been stagnant, as you know, and so that's really a source of concern when we see the markets picking up in the US. They're stagnant in Europe, so that's going to influence some decisions in the future about going public or not, or about going public in Europe or not. Because the consequences of the lack of depth that we have in our market are on valuation of companies and on the overall cost of the IPO. Now, concretely, we have not seen companies going to the new listings, new IPOs, new companies going to the US recently in our countries. There's a phenomenon of existing issuers as a consequence of Brexit moving to the US from Ireland and from the UK. But the new IPOs coming from the SME pipeline, from the technology pipeline in our countries, they are coming to list domestically or at least in Europe. I think we need to take advantage of this gloomy cycle to fix our problems, and I think the Listing Act is definitely the right thing to do.
So, I'm sure we've got many great companies listing right across the European Union, and now as much as but we don't grow them to this sort of strength that the United States does, to Amazon, Apple, and so forth. I mean, is that because we don't have the pools of liquidity, or we're thicker in Europe? I've never thought we're more stupid in Europe. On the contrary, something goes wrong. We've got these companies that have got wonderful ideas. Some, of course, drift across the United States. Why can't we build up these companies to world beaters? That's what I want. And you heard the numbers this morning. I mean, the top 20 tech companies in the world is, what, 2 or 3 Europeans, if that. What's the reason? Is it simple? Again,
I mean, the pipeline of growing companies, scale-ups, tech companies, high-growth companies exists in Europe. We've nothing to be ashamed of. Government have done so much in most of the countries to seed and to foster early investment on these companies. We have that pipeline. I also believe we have very established, very large listed companies in most of our countries that are actually growing. So even if globally, including in the US, the number of listed companies is decreasing globally for everyone. The average size of the biggest one, the DAX, the CAC 40, etc., is actually increasing because they do M&A, and they do M&A thanks to the market, right? So the issue is, how can we create a true CMU by putting together all the liquidity we have in Europe, all the investors, all the capital market together into one pool of liquidity? Because if we compare it to the US, that's the main difference. We don't have pension funds, we don't have enough investors in Europe, but we also are still very fragmented. We have many order books, and the liquidity is not pooled together. And the tape is not going to solve that. Sorry, I said I wouldn't talk about the tape. For me, we have 2 issues to solve. One is the fragmentation, and the other one is the access for investors such as pension, retail, and institutional investors.
Any comments, or should we move on to the politics and the law? I think that's probably the right thing to do. Is that okay? So, Tanya, tell us all about the Listing Act, the rationale behind it, the key proposals. Are you optimistic we're going to get this done in this cycle?
Well, David, I very much hope we do. We don't have a choice. Well, the rationale is quite simple. When we started looking at the situation in Europe, and there are some, let's say, markets that are doing a bit better, others that are doing a bit worse. We also see that many more SMEs are now considering, also, like Beatrice explained, public listings. But I think it still remains to be a very expansive route for a company. So when we approached this project, we said, okay, where can we ensure that we reduce the burden on the company that would consider listing? Because eventually we want to avoid the situation when companies go to other jurisdictions, and we want companies to grow in Europe. This is where we want to generate jobs and growth. Obviously, the decision to list is complicated. Too many things come into play, where can I generate my client base, can I keep control, what do I need to do after I'm listed, it's all complicated. So, of course, as regulators, we can only do that much. And I think exchanges have a lot to contribute on that one, and we've been discussing with exchanges. I think some exchanges are building this research support programs and guide companies actually on the route towards listing. So from regulators' point of view, we really try to find the right balance between, okay, what is essential for companies to comply with in order to ensure adequate level of investor protection. Because if we don't protect investors, there's no trust in capital markets, and we cannot have efficient and well-functioning capital markets. So trust is essential, investor protection, market integrity, essential. But can we achieve the same outcomes at a lesser cost? And we've concluded that we can. So the main elements focus around prospectus regime, so the document the companies have to prepare the moment they list. This is meant to be an investor protection, investor information document. It turned into something entirely different over time. So we try to ensure that these documents are streamlined, they're comparable, the cost of producing such a document is reduced for companies, and then it is produced only when it is needed. And this is where I want to emphasize one of the key elements of the prospectus review is to ensure that companies who want to list, or rather who want to issue more of the same, so same type of equity, same type of non-equity instruments that are already out there, and a lot of information exists, both on the company and those types of instruments, they do not have to go through the same motions as a company that has nothing listed. So there needs to be proportionality. If information is already in the public domain, why don't we exempt companies, in those cases, from the prospectus requirement? So this is one of the key element exemptions for companies that want to issue more of the same. So then alleviation around the information that goes into prospectus, also page limit to ensure that investors can go through those documents, and also comparability. Let's not forget, we are now building the European single access point. There was a political agreement on that. It will take a while to set it up, but once it's there, prospectus is gonna be in the first phase. So this document will go on this centralized portal. We need to ensure that information in prospectuses is comparable. Today, in Europe, we don't have the harmonized sequence of information. So investors have to navigate through pages and pages to actually be able to source the same information. So this is key.
So if I look at this dispassionately, it's a simplification exercise. It's particularly designed to help smaller companies. It's proportionality, all of that. So if I took the EU listing regime and compared it with the United States listing rules, would the outcome be simpler? I mean, parallel, similar, or what?
SEC rules, I mean, that's a big illusion to say that SEC rules are lighter than EU rules. They're not lighter. Actually, they are quite strict. But the US has much more to offer in terms of investor base, in terms of client base. So there are lots of benefits that come with it. And there's also a lot of reputational element that comes into place. So in the EU, we have to be clever. We have to do what is absolutely essential, to ensure that our companies remain, well supervised, but that we do it in a clever way and not overcomplicate things.
The point I'm getting at here is that with a good outcome on the Listing Act, and we'll hear from the co-legislators in a second, we're not going to disadvantage ourselves vis-a-vis our major competitor, which is the United States, in terms of demands for information, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to be on a parallel track, right?
Well, I would even say we would seek to advantage our companies. It's one thing I want to make clear, it's not about regulatory arbitrage and trying to compete with another jurisdiction in terms of rules. This is not what we're doing. What we're trying to do is to have an agile, proportionate legislative framework that would allow companies to access.
Which won't disadvantage us internationally.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, look at multiple vote share rates, because one of the reasons why companies, high-tech, deep-tech companies, do not go and list in the EU is that not all EU member states are actually offering the possibility to issue multiple vote shares. So shares with different voting rights attached to them that would allow the owners of those companies, the founders, to keep control, also after they're listed. The US has it. They've had it since forever with no safeguards whatsoever. One may have a discussion on whether this is appropriate or not, but they have it. So here we're now having a discussion, maybe we need to have a sunset clause on those, to say that a company after 10 years has to switch back to one share, one vote. The US doesn't have it. If we have it here in Europe, that means that 10 years down the road, these companies will actually switch to the US. So we have to avoid that type of outcome.
Let's hear from the co-legislators. Our distinguished rapporteur, Alfred Sant, who's the rapporteur of the Listing Act in the European Parliament, just published his report. So how do you see all this, Alfred? Give us your views.
Well, I start from the point of view about CMU. I think it's on the ropes. on the ropes. I mean, it's in bad shape. That's the kind of feedback I get, not just from institutional investors, but even from the regulators. Yesterday I was speaking to a national regulator, I won't say which one it was, and told me, we have to get CMU back on track. And the Listing Act is an indication of one reason why the CMU project is not really working well. I get it from across the board, regulatory burdens, too much of a regulatory burden, which is discouraging investors from coming out on the market and keeping back then, of course, issuers from coming through. On the other hand, the Listing Act is a necessary condition to get things moving again, but it won't be sufficient because there are deep-seated reasons like fragmentation of the market, like culture in the EU vis-a-vis culture in the US, financial culture, I mean, like other factors as well that are militating against getting CMU really on track. And then when we come back to the Listing Act, the whole question is this: how do we get the Listing Act to operate effectively, to reduce regulatory burdens, while ensuring, however, that investor protection is still effective? And that's a challenge, because in the Parliament there are still quite a number of guys who believe that that is paramount. The problem is, okay, you can do all the investment protection, investor protection you want to, but if there are no issues, you don't have to worry about that anymore, because there is nothing to invest in. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but that puts the question forward. So what we have to look at is how within this framework of it's being necessary but not sufficient, how the proposals of the Commission can be framed to be equally acceptable both to those who are worried about investment protection and those who are, like me, concerned about lack of issuances. And then there's the added problem, if you like to call it a problem, that ESG issues cannot be avoided. They are coming, they are there, and they can't just be backtracked. In terms of the prospectus itself, the prospectus is not something that is there for retail investors, in my view. It's there for professional investors, professional advisors. So one of the trusts we get back from the market is this: why do we have to have a page limit on this one? If it's going to be read by professional investors, well, they should be amenable to be able to read it, whether it's 800 pages, whether it's 300 pages, whatever. It's more important to have it standardized and simplified, which is what the Commission proposals are doing. That's very acceptable. At the same time, one of the worries is this, that if we're talking about retail investors as well, we have to think about the question of what do they read? And at most, they would read the summary of the report on the prospectus. And we don't have enough stuff there to be able to ensure that it is readable for retail investors. How to do that? And that's something that I think regulatory authorities should look into, especially through ESMA. And this is my final point. One of the problems is fragmentation of the market. And to go against that, we have to have some kind of movement forward towards uniformization of how national markets work. It's very difficult, because they all have their own ways of doing things. And they wouldn't like encroachment on that usually. So the Listing Act, in my view, has got to introduce some mechanisms which enable convergence at regulatory level, and that can only be done under the supervision of ESMA.
So you're in favor of simplification where possible?
And standardization as well.
And standardization, so I think everybody would agree we need that for the prospectus and so forth. Where you have questions is this balance between retail and institutional investors.
In terms of how we consider the prospectus itself. Yeah. The prospectus, once it's standardized and simplified, as far as I'm concerned, can go on for the length of the Bible, because it's going to be read by professional investors. But we have to think more, in my view, about the summary report, which is more indicated towards retail investors. And in my view, we don't yet have the tools to make that summary report more effective.
Do you see an increased role for ESMA here? Are you going to support that?
I would like that to happen. Of course, national NCAs national competent authorities have got to remain the executive arm of ESMA. But ESMA has got to be given a more proactive role in drawing up the rules and getting the NCAs to agree on the rules.
Delegate powers to ESMA to sort out some of the technical stuff.
That would be much more effective in my view.
Yeah, okay. So thank you very much. Fernando, how are things going in the Council? Of course, you're days away from piloting the European Union for the next 6 months. Are you optimistic here? Are you hearing good noises from the Council, from the Member States, or are you seeing a pile of trouble?
Thank you, David. Well, I think that the proposal tabled by the Commission of the Listing Act was, and that's my personal assessment, but I think that it was well received by most delegations at the Council. And the proof is that most important elements of that proposal were kept. And I would also dare to say that they were improved on some aspects. So, it was also positively welcomed by the member states that the proposal was backed by a solid analysis and it tackled the right issues. That was, in my view, the general view from at the Council Working Party. The Council introduced some changes that I think tweaked the text. Basically in those areas where the national domestic supervisors have an expertise and a very good insight, hands-on, on, for instance, the procedure for approving filing prospectuses or the insider list, which is a highly sensitive topic, but how the drafting of the insider list for preventing market abuse. But in general terms, it was, the most part was kept and improved in some aspects. And I think most delegations or the Council is looking forward to the negotiation with the Parliament of this file. I've also read the draft report by Mr. Sands, and I think that, of course, there are differences between both texts, but that we are closer than far away from each other. There is room for agreement for sure, and for a good agreement as well, not just to rush into an agreement, but try to find a good agreement and a good balance.
Are you seeing blocks of member states on different issues? Can you sort of describe where you think the trouble is, or if there is any trouble? Or I should say you're the chair, so anybody who's got any points, talk to Fernando, please. But you see what I'm getting at here.
I saw that, in my view, the Council was, there were no clearly identifiable blocks in certain areas. I think most member states agreed on some improvements that the text needed, and also agreed on the positive aspects. For instance, on the prospectus, I think it was the streamlining and the standardization was very well received by most member states. Also, here there is, for instance, a difference with the draft report on the page limit, and I also personally think that the page limit is a progress, because here we face the typical collective action problem. Everybody knows that prospectuses are too long nowadays, and they all include a long list of disclaimers that are absolutely identical from one company to the other, but it just included just out of safety, just in case. You never know. I don't want to be the free rider here, or the only one who makes a shorter prospectus. And that's why we saw, for instance, that the 300-page limit or the other page limit could be important. But on the insider list, for instance, there are also the majority of member states were in favor of keeping the current insider list framework, specifically because there has been so much case law interpretation around the insider list and what is misleading information, that it was better to keep it than to overhaul the system.
Do you expect the Council to accept some delegation of powers, responsibilities to ESMA in certain technical areas? You think that we'll go along with that?
Yes, I think that, as you know, the debate about granting more powers to ESMA or not is quite sensitive, I would say, at the Council. This is not a secret, everybody knows it. But the member states, for instance, agreed and were quite positive on streamlining certain aspects of the administrative procedure that takes place within NCAs and harmonizing it across the EU. For instance, what criteria they can use to scrutinize prospectuses. This will be drafted and developed by ESMA. This is a huge step in my view. Also on the timeline for the filing and approving the prospectus across the EU. What happens if they don't approve a prospectus within a timeline? What are the consequences from a legal point of view? I think that these administrative procedural matters are important for issues to harmonize them across the EU, and these are a middle way that could be explored on other files as well, probably.
Very good. Let's hear from Beatriz and Anthony. I mean, is this a game-changing act? Is the Listing Act? I mean, is it going to make your life and your life for your investors much simpler? Are we going to see a sudden surge of listing prospects in the Bolsa de Mercados Español?
Yeah, I think we are in the good way. There are still things to do, but for example, I think that anything that is simplifying the listing process is very well welcome. We have seen, for example, already a simplified prospectus when we were during the times of the pandemic. That was a good idea, and we are maintaining it somehow. The reduction, for example, of the threshold for the free float is as well a very welcome measure. DSUP is as well a good idea in terms of maybe collaboration between exchanges. I don't know where is the frontier between the exchanges and the regulators, but it's a good point that at some point in time should include as well sustainability matters. And this point on harmonization, I think it's very, very relevant. So we should not be competing on doing any kind of arbitrage between in the European Union. So we should be applying the same criteria.
What don't you like in the proposal? Is there anything you don't like?
Yeah, we still have to simplify things and go further.
But is there anything that really grates with you, you don't like at all in the proposal of the Commission?
I would say the length of the prospectus, maybe it's something that we have to take a look at. There's no common position on that, strangely enough.
You want to take an axe and cut down the size of the prospectus. Is that the problem?
Let's be following what Daniel was saying. Let's be clever and practical, and let's go.
You'd like to see some serious simplification here. Yeah. Anthony, what do you think?
Look, I think we welcome very much the Listing Act. Is a positive act of simplification and an attempt to standardize and independently from the country where you are incorporated or the country where you want to be listed, if the process is simpler and harmonized, it's going to be very positively perceived, not just by listed companies and their advisors, but by investors, and that's what we want to do at the end. So we very much welcome the Listing Act. There are three areas. Jumping on your next question, David, there are three areas where we would like a bit of attention. One is the exemption for the SMEs, which we believe it should be the same for everyone at 12 million. I don't think we should start having compromises on certain countries, because again that's the door for fragmentation and misunderstanding for investors. So let's stick to one rule for everyone there. We welcome the novelty of the EU providing a legislative framework around multiple voting shares. So that's a very sensitive topic for some of the countries. Nevertheless, we see it as a kind of a first step for an attempt to harmonize corporate law, or at least a part of corporate law that would impact issuers and would impact the perception of investors. The discussion about voting shares comes in every pre-filing conversation we have with issuers, and sometimes it creates some regulatory shopping, and we don't want that. And the last part, and I don't think you will be surprised, but the cross-market order book surveillance mechanism should capture everything and everyone, including systematic internalizer. So that's fairness again, and that's about reading Europe with all the liquidity that exists.
What do you think of those points, Tanya?
So on 300-page limit, I think there's a lot of debate. There's a simplification versus flexibility debate. We are for simplification and also for readability of prospectuses. So that's the important point from the investor point of view. So it needs to be careful balance between issuers and investors' considerations. On the 12 million, could not agree more with Anthony. In the Commission's proposal, of course, we wanted to have a single threshold below which no prospectus would be required. In the Council text, that has been changed. We also see that the rapporteur's report introduces quite some significant changes in this area. On the last point, I don't know how many of you know what a cross-border order book mechanism, exchange mechanism is, but this is basically exchange of data between NCAs for the purpose of market abuse. So to allow NCAs in cases where you have, let's say, two NCAs being placed in between one NCA responsible for the issuance of a particular instrument and another NCA responsible for the trading or trading value of the instrument where it is traded. So you actually have the cross-border element. And the idea is to facilitate the ability of NCAs to spot instances of market abuse, so really odd behavior. And currently there is a mechanism that would allow NCAs to access sporadically and ask this data sporadically, but there is no ongoing mechanism. So the idea there is to ensure that there is a mechanism that would allow NCAs to access this information on an ongoing basis. And the debate is, okay, should it be limited to exchanges? Should we also introduce this for systematic internalizers, which are largely banks that are trading in proprietary inventory? The question is, for the Commission at least, why we're doing it. And the reason why we're doing it is to curtail market abuse. Where market abuse possibly is more likely, and where the impact of market abuse instances is more likely is where you have a significant cross-border dimension and where you have really a lot of investors having access to trading. So that's why we started with exchanges, but even that debate was very complicated with member states because of the cost consideration. Of course, we have many more systematic internalizers than we have exchanges, and that would complicate the debate even more so. Now, I'm not saying this is necessarily where we will stop. Eventually, it may develop into something different, much more comprehensive, but we need to start somewhere, and we need to start at a point where actually member states would be prepared to sign up and implement this.
Any comments on the sort of lacunae that we've heard?
Well, the point there is this: sometimes in theory, one is right. In practice, one gets wrong. For instance, this threshold question. In theory, I agree with it, with the Commission proposal. In practice, it won't work. It won't work because member states won't like it. And sometimes the threshold is very good for a medium-sized country, but doesn't make sense for a smaller one. And at this stage of the game, of course, this works out in terms of fragmentation. We have to sort of dilute fragmentation, if you like. But there are ways and ways of doing that. You can't do it by imposing limits that sometimes do not make sense for a small fragmented system. I realized that when we were working, for instance, on covered bonds back 4 or 5 years ago, where you had the same problem all the time coming up. And in this case, I think, when we talk about how to conquer or to restrict fragmentation, it's got to be in the framing of process rules rather than benchmark rules. Because process rules will then be handed over to ESMA to operate, and they will slowly become the custom. And then, of course, you work eventually to decrease the fragmentation. I would guess that the threshold approach that's being followed is counterproductive at this point of time.
Well, thank you. I'd like to, I think it's always interesting for an audience like this to know how the co-legislators and the Commission sees the perspectives of an agreement. I think Tanya was telling me that we've got until, well, I think you were as well, Alf, until April next year, after which we have a downtime for the Parliament elections and for the new Commission and so forth. So that pushes us actually really into 2025. So my question is, what are the prospectives for getting an agreement on this listing act before April next year? I mean, Alfred, go ahead. Well, cheer us up.
First of all, the Commission presented its proposals last December. The Council went bang on them, as far as I know, and has finalized its position. I'm afraid the Parliament trailed. We started working on this. I was assigned to this only in March. And we have finished our report, draft report, about 2 weeks back. And time is pressing. There are the summer holidays, there's a Christmas recess, and then, of course, the elections coming up in June next year, which means that the Parliament for the last 2 months will be, you know, walking slowly, if you like. So what we're trying to do is this, to get it out of Parliament, our final report, if you like, by November. And this should give us a window on
through plenary. That's through plenary.
Through plenary. That's going to be extremely tight. That should give us a window under the Spanish presidency and then the Belgian presidency to, in the first 3 months, get them through, perhaps. As our colleague has said, the issues are not so divergent in terms of how people relate to them. It's in the technical adjustments to certain proposals that there are going to be problems, in my view. On top of which, the ideological dispute between investor protection and issuer freedom, if you like, and of course then ESG rules, because ESG rules, in our view at least, in my view, let's say, have somehow to be tinkled into the process, because otherwise they come into the second stage, and that would make it counterproductive. Best signal them as of now. But apart from that, on a technical basis, there shouldn't be much of a problem during the first 3 months of next year, if we get it through Parliament by November, early December, to finalize. And we would like to do that because, as you say, post-elections there will be the whole problem of a new commission coming up, another year basically spent in administrative shake-ups.
You think 5 months after, let's say, your timetable holds, you've got a position in the Parliament through plenary in November. Let's assume, and I'll ask Fernando about the timing in the Council. You still think there's enough time to do the job before?
That's how it's being planned.
Yeah.
It's not easy to make it shorter.
So, Fernando, have you cancelled summer holidays for your working all the way through August? That'll make you very popular as the incoming presidency. But I mean, when are we going to get a common position here?
I haven't cancelled them, but I have booked them with free cancellation until the last day, so just in case, and shortened them, of course. But
what's your timing?
Not much more to add on what Mr. Sands said. We are ready to start working with the Parliament as soon as they have approved their position. So if the position is passed by November, we would be ready to start, and also with the Commission's advice and support, we would be ready to start negotiations right away and hold at least one trialogue, possibly, it depends, more, but at least one, that for sure, and make good progress. But we don't want to rush either. We want to have a good agreement, not just an agreement, but a good agreement at and solid technical level. So, but we are ready to step in. Yeah.
What's your assessment here, Tanya? I mean, you're very well versed in all of these things now, at the heart of the Capital Markets Union, steering all this stuff through the co-decision. Are we going to have an agreement by? What's your forecast? Reputation on the line here.
March. Let's have it by March. Yes, we cannot afford, because I think if there is really You know, will there is a way. And I think as long as there is an agreement between the co-legislators that they want to have it, they will have it. It all depends on goodwill. And I think what is important, we have an agreement on the objectives. We may still have disagreements on how to get there. So we may need to work around the details. The details doesn't mean that these are unimportant details, but important details. Nonetheless, I think as long as the end result is clear and we share this vision, I think it should be doable. And let's not forget, I mean, for the SME Listing Act 1, which dates, 4 years ago, it took us only one trialogue. I mean, it was much smaller, but just one trialogue because we also were running late and we managed to have it before March. So I think it is possible. A lot of technical work we need to go into this, but I think it also depends on the willingness of the parties to move towards a common solution.
Yeah, and I think, you know, striking these agreements is really important because you get a snowball effect. And I think, you know, international investors will see this. You want to see a continuous flow of good agreements between the institutions. And then people will start to say, things are really happening in Europe. And, you know, so I really think it's important that, and I'm sure we all agree, that we don't have a lot of overlaps into the next European political cycle with, I mean, the danger that, you know, we won't be doing anything before 2026, 2027.
David,
I mean,
let's not forget, we don't live in a vacuum. The UK is moving and moving quickly. So I think we should be moving as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's use the remaining time we have to think beyond this cycle into the next political cycle. And how do we really make this union a dynamic capital market in these areas? I think these measures are important. Don't get me wrong. But it seems to me there's a lot more we need to do. And I said last night, and some of you would have heard it, that I think the prize is enormous. The prize is enormous for Europe. It's more growth, it's more diversified growth, it's more jobs, and so forth. And it's absolutely vital part of the future of Europe. So how do we get this? How do we create this dynamic? I mean, what would you? You're the new commissioner. Let me put you in that position. What are you going to do? What is the first 2 or 3 things you're going to say, and then you're the Commissioner for Financial Services?
I wouldn't accept your offer in the first place to join the Commission, but apart from that, I would look upon the problem really no longer as an institutional problem, nor as a legal problem, but it's a marketing problem. How do we market capital markets to the retail investor? And that's something that hasn't really been tried as of now. I would look at other institutions, other markets that have, through the internet, for instance, made deep inroads in markets. You're going to laugh at this, but I see a parallel, like the gaming industry, for instance, as a marketing concept. And that has got to be thought through, because you need funds to have that kind of marketing campaign to make retail investors want to join capital markets. If you're, I don't know, a civil servant and you've got 20,000 euros saved, how do I get you to invest 10,000 in the capital market? That is not illegal, that is not an institutional problem, that's a marketing problem. So I wouldn't want to do that from a Commission's point of view, but you have to do it from, I don't know, a governmental state-appointed body to do marketing for it? That would be my reply at this stage, because there are so many factors related to cultural, financial culture. And so many factors as well related to the interest side of it, vis-a-vis dividend side of it, that have got to be changed as well. That's where we go into the legal institutional then.
So, turning to my left, Beatrice, you're the new European Commissioner. I'm propulsing you to the 13th floor. Is it still the 13th floor of the Berlaymont? 13th floor of the Berlaymont. You're in charge now. What are you going to do? How are you going to really trigger these dynamic markets I think we all want? What are you going to do? What are your priorities?
Well, I'm not sure I will be afraid to get there, but anyway. So it's very interesting, this market thing that you were mentioning, because one of my first points here is we have to promote the value of being listed in Europe. So we maybe not do it so much. In this, for example, I think it's very relevant that we have to involve the companies, for example, already listed, in attracting more companies. So we have to do some publicity, visibility on the success stories we have. So maybe this is a little bit related on this kind of thing. Of course, we have to go further on simplifying the listing process. We have been speaking about this all the day. The tax measures, again, mentioned along the day are very, very relevant for the companies, for the investors. We have to be sure that we are attractive for them and that it makes sense to come to the markets. We have, again, nothing new to attract retail investors. I think it's very relevant that the retail investor is coming again to the markets, and maybe we have to think about the younger people. Again, nothing that has not been mentioned, but I think we have to think about them. They are coming to products that are not on the regulated markets. We have to take a look at that and make the markets attractive for them as well. And again, expanding the value chain. So it's not only the main market, it's not only the SME markets. We have to expand, again, in different kinds of companies. So we have to go for the micro companies and prepare them to get listed. We have to put in place, as for example, what we are having in BME, the pre-market environment. You need a training, and you need to get prepared for the listing. So these are measures that may have sense. And again, collaboration, I already mentioned that before, collaboration between exchanges in terms of information and harmonization, and maybe why not some kind of collaboration with private equity and venture capital? At least we have to be complementary at some point in time.
Now, Anthony, I'm putting you in this same spot in the Berlin. I mean, what are your priorities? What's your plan going to be? You're in charge.
Yep. I mean, I couldn't agree more about partnering and communicating. I think the Listing Act is not a controversial topic. It's consensual, but I think we need to make it a sort of political act to say this is something we should talk about. We should celebrate once it's approved and accepted, and we should go on a roadshow all together, talking to private equity firms. I completely agree. Talking to investors in the UK, investors in the US, potentially in Asia. I don't think people expect us to resolve all the fragmentation problems in Europe in 3 years or even in 5 years or more, but they expect the guidelines and direction that are unambiguous, and so it's about avoiding gold plating, making sure that investors' life and issuers' life is easier, and this Listing Act is a concrete demonstration of that. So let's go on the road together and talk about it and celebrate it. Now the other thing I wanted to say is more controversial, and that's more of a personal view. It's not FESE view, but I think there are expectations from investors for guidelines around will there be a EU supervision at some point, and what would it look like? And that's a difficult topic, obviously, because all the national competent authorities, in particular on listing and admission, are extremely competent. They know extremely well their market. They know extremely well their issuers. Nevertheless, we still have 27 NCAs and 27 ways of doing things on admission. And at Euronext, we worked with the Italian ecosystem and the Italian Treasury and Consub to simplify the listing rules in Italy last year, because there was a lot of gold plating, and we've done something significant. Well, the impact on the IPO pipeline was immediate. So it's not when you get rid of the gold plating and you start to simplify things, there is an immediate impact, and it's not long term. So I think we, as much as it is painful, I think we need to have the conversation about EU supervision for real.
So Tanya.
Well, Anthony's speech was like a balm to my heart. So if I could,
It's going to be in your cabinet, by the way.
I'll have to think about it. So 3 things.
I'm putting my name forward, by the way.
Thank you, Dave. 3 things: taxation, pensions, and supervision. Taxation, because it's super powerful. It drives capital flows in one day. This is as powerful as taxation is. I mean, all of the instruments developed by some of the member states with developed capital markets like Sweden, both to drive retail investor participation. For example, in Sweden, they had this concept of investment saving account that was very closely linked to tax brackets and basically...
No financial transactions tax.
No, that's a different one. I'm not in favor of that one.
Sweet.
No, tax incentives. That's probably what I should have said. So tax in order to drive, because it's a very powerful, very potent driver. Pensions, because we have underdeveloped pensions, because budgets are currently under stress. We will see member states struggling much more in the future. And there is still a lot of untapped potential for Pillar 2 and Pillar 3, occupational and personal pension products. Retail investors are very, very slow in educating themselves. We are doing lots of things, but developing this equity culture that Afra talked about will still take a lot of time. So doing things around pensions, like considering auto-enrollments, this would be, again, a very powerful tool to bring scale. And number 3, supervision, but I think Anthony mentioned it quite right. We did a lot around rules. We need to do more about how those rules are implemented on the grounds. And there are still lots of differences there.
I think that's very, very sensible. I think on the institutional side, a final word for Fernando, I think on the institutional side, Europe's got the institutions it needs. I think the distribution of competences has to be looked at in terms of reinforcing ESMA over time to deal much more with cross-border business, and particularly when it's systemic. I remember somebody telling me that Germany, for example, I believe has 40,000 broker-dealers. Well, there's no way ESMA, for example, is going to be able to supervise 40,000 broker-dealers in Germany. But if those broker-dealers are working big-time cross-border, size limit, then I think you can make the case that ESMA has to have more powers. That's my view. So, Fernando, from your point of view, looking forward, where would you put the emphasis for the next cycle?
Well, as Tanya said, I think on the taxation front there is still some room, and there can be made much more progress. Also on insolvency, should not be underestimated the huge impact that this can have. On maybe also administrative convergence, procedural matters across the European Union, harmonization, that's important. But to me, this is my personal take, probably what is more important is to have a clear roadmap as we have had until now with a CMU project, very clear with clear objectives, timeline, so that everybody knows what we can expect, and that offers a European solution to our problems and to other idiosyncrasy. Of course, we have to look at other more developed or bigger markets, but we shouldn't precipitate into adapting anything that is successful there, because we have to try to find our own way. And then final word, I think we also, all of us can do a little bit more in trying to make primary listings more appealing to companies. And here there is room for educating, mentoring managers at those companies and making them see the benefits and the wider societal benefits of listing in terms of, well, it's good for your reputation of your company, which is a super important asset right now, for your reputation in terms of corporate governance, and also the wider societal impact is something that investors, and specifically retail investors, value more and more nowadays, I think.
Well, thank you very much, all of you. It's been a very dynamic, and I hope...
I would have a couple of questions
from the audience. I couldn't see them.
And I maybe read two of them for sake of time. The one question probably addressed to Tatjana is, issuers are exempt in the corporate bond space if to issue a prospectus if the denomination of the security is above 100,000. That obviously excludes retail investors. So question is, why didn't we tackle that? And the second one also goes in the retail space, and maybe a good introduction for the next panel also this afternoon. Retail investors, obviously, Mr. Santius said that want to invest on capital markets. Don't you think that protection, collective redress are essential? Is alleviating rules that protect them really the way to go? So maybe just 2 minutes, 2 questions.
So on the exemption for professional investors, obviously when you're dealing with retail investors, you need to ensure that there is a certain degree of protection. What we try to do is to rather focus on the instruments, including non-equity, that are already issued, and focus around exemptions directed towards those instruments on which there is a lot of information already present. So we've extended the exemption that existed up to 20%, but that concerned only admission to trading to public offers, meaning that also retail investors would be able to benefit from those offers that are currently, because of this limited exemption and because it is limited only to admission to trading but not to public offer, is only in many cases only limited to institutional investors. So I don't think we can necessarily draw the equal sign between the interest on and ability to also absorb the information that is out there between institutional and retail investors, but I think there are ways that we can tackle the problem by relying on those instances where a lot of information is out already in the public domain.
If the question was, how can you attract retail investors by reducing their protection? I assume that retail investors will be interested in a good deal. If you can convince them, and that's again a marketing problem, if you can convince them that they get a good deal with a reduced investor protection that is really redundant in parts, I think that's a good deal, and they will take it. But again, it's a marketing problem, the way I see it. It is not being tackled like a marketing problem, I'm afraid.
Any other comments? Well, thank you all very much for a very interesting and I hope enjoyable discussion. I just want to leave you with one thought, personal thought. I'm a European, at it for 34 years. But when Europe does things well, we can be best in class, I'll give you just a few examples to take away. Our competition authorities are mirrored all over the world. The pharmaceutical work, where we distributed our vaccines, the new generation economic programs. I was in a discussion the other day talking about the American banking failures, recent banking failures. And there were 3 Republican distinguished people, I shan't mention their names, but I've got to tell you, I've got to tell you that when I heard the European efforts here, Eduardo Boro from the SSB and so forth, we were far better actually. So, we somehow have to break this sort of logjam of thinking it's us, the member states, or giving away competences. It's actually, if we can think as a collective, as Europeans, we can do this job really well. But we have to get into that mindset, and we have to have the strong political leadership right at the top, from the Parliament, from the member states, from the European Council, from the Commission, and drive it forward. That is a success story, and will be a success story. Bit parts, slow technicity won't do the job. I leave you with that. Thank you very much.
This is the last panel of the FESE Convention on a very important topic. I think we heard today many times the word retail across the different panel discussions. And I'm very pleased to have had the introduction from Alexandra. I think the best possible introduction to this panel, right? To listen to Deputy Director General of the Commission, explaining this strategy that has just been put forward. Without much introduction now, I would like to introduce the distinguished set of speakers that are here with me to discuss and assess anything and everything about retail. So next to me, Marcel Hack, Director of DG FISMA European Commission, and obviously one of the, if I may say, fathers of this retail investment strategy. So you are one of them. Next to him, Jella Bena Heinaha, so bear with me my German accent, I hope I got it right, President of Better Finance, the European Association of the National Retail Investors Consumers. So I think a very legitimate voice precisely in this debate. Next to him, Bjorn Sibern, Executive Vice President and President of European Market Services at Nasdaq, giving the voice of market operators. And next to him, last but not least, Member of European Parliament, André Kovarik, working in the Econ Committee. And I need to say we're very grateful he's here today. He has a very busy agenda. So he has a vote later. So we excuse him because he will have to leave the panel a bit earlier. So thank you very much all for being here with me. And before we go into the discussion, I want to say that, in fact, we hear a lot that Capital Markets Union that works for citizens, right? And this is somehow increasing more and more. And these citizens, or these people, are precisely those that, according to Eurostat data, have up to 10 trillion euros in bank accounts currently today. And we know that this bank-based financing is really under big pressure. So I think it's agreed by everyone that we really need to move into market-based financing. But of course, we need to really see what are the measures that will make the trigger to mobilize all these savings and all this liquidity into the real economy. Because I think this is what Europe is currently lacking. We have this strategy there, but it's true that there are many components about this plan. I would like to organize the panel in 3 rounds. Since we have such a good introduction already, I think we will take it from what the Commission has put forward, discuss what is it in the strategy, and then I would like to do a bit of a review on the current dynamics about the retail behavior that we have in Europe. And obviously, at the end, I would like to do, as in previous panel, look at the future and see, what we can aim for things to come in the next European mandate. But before that, very briefly, I want to quote Commissioner McGuinness, and precisely it was at the conference of Better Finance, when she said something very inspirational for me. She said that she had the dream to see a strong retail finance culture in Europe where everyone is included and their interests are looked after. So Marcel, I guess you share that dream, but please tell us a little bit more how you put that dream in reality.
Absolutely, I share that dream, and does that work? Yeah. Let me add another quote from Commissioner McGuinness, and that is, she said, without retail investors, there's no capital markets union. And that's where Alexandra left it, and where I would like to pick it up. The Capital Markets Union and making a step forward in completing the Capital Markets Union is really at the heart of the retail investor strategy. What we want to achieve is to bring retail investors to the capital markets, and I hope that is also a shared vision. And to do that, Alexandra, I think, was very clear about this. What we need to achieve is create trust in capital markets. This is what is currently missing in Europe, also compared to other jurisdictions. There is a lack of trust and confidence in capital markets by retail investors, and that is what we want to address with the retail investment strategy. We want to increase the level of protection of retail investors and take measures that create more trust in capital markets. Alexandra has mentioned the ways we want to do this by improving the information documents, by addressing misleading marketing, by stronger enforcement, by addressing excessive fees, by addressing poor value products, by improving the quality of advice. All these measures that we have in the package should help build up trust and encourage more people, more citizens to not only be citizens but also retail investors. The focus on retail investment should lead to a win-win situation where not only retail investors get a better deal and better outcomes for their investment, but also on the side of the industry, more investors that are drawn into the capital markets, which will lead to more liquid and deeper capital markets that also the industry can benefit from. And maybe I leave it.
Thank you so much, Marcel. I think it's obviously a very important point, the trust. I will now like to turn to Jella. Do you agree with that, Jella? Does this retail investment strategy make your life easier at work? Do you think that the people you represent will gain trust in the markets, or you think that something else is needed?
Rosa, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation by FESE. I think it's a great conference we have today, and I'm very glad to have the retail investment strategy as a topic of the last topic of today. And I want to come back to McGuinness because he's cited all the time. Yesterday, I think she made very clear, public money is not enough for the CMU, not for the Green Deal, banking money neither. So we need the retail investor to finance this huge transformation we are looking at. And that's why, of course, as Better Finance, we are very supportive of the retail investment strategy. We think it is the right step in the right direction. We see positive advancements, but of course we also see that it falls short by fulfilling some of the key objectives of this strategy. What am I talking about? Of course, I'm talking about bias-free advice. I'm talking about transparent and comparable information. You addressed it already, Alexandra. And I'm talking about open markets with a variety of competitive and cost-efficient financial services. I know, Rosa, it is not in your focus to talk about inducements, but as a representative of retail investors, I have to talk about that because it's just key. And we have to understand that trust, as mentioned by Marcel, is so important, and the most important condition for consumers to massively invest in capital markets is that they can rely on trustworthy, unbiased advice. And to be honest, this is currently not the case. Therefore, Better Finance has been very supportive of the idea of a ban of inducements. By the way, also the other consumer organizations. And we share Alexandra's concerns regarding the quality of advice. We think it's a major issue. And if we look at the advice given by the banks, I can say it for Germany because that's our experience, I think there is still a huge confusion between selling and advising. Of course, if you have a product manufacturer who pays to the distributor for a certain product, then this is selling and not advising. and that's something we have to take into consideration. If the products that we are advised to buy were really so competitive, so suited to consumer needs, and offered to the best value for money and cost efficient, why should we need any payments by manufacturers? I mean, that's counterproductive. Furthermore, and that's also an issue Alexandra mentioned, we are very supportive that the proposal extends the ban on inducements to unadvised sales of packaged retail investment products. It is only fair where consumers do not get advice, they should not pay for. I think that's obvious. Unfortunately, the legislative proposal fails to extend the inducement ban to portfolio management offered by insurance intermediaries under IDD. We see this as a major loophole, which could create an opportunity for regulatory arbitrage. Finally, and that's also something Alexandra mentioned, we always hear the argument a ban on inducements would have disruptive consequences for the markets. Well, maybe I should ask the provocative questions. Why should a system that delivers bad advice and poor value for money to retail investors not be disrupted? We at Better Finance are not scared of disruption, especially when we take a look at the Netherlands, where this disruption already happened after a scandal. And last week at our conference, we heard a representative of the Dutch AMF, and she was very positive on the advantages for the retail investors. So let's be creative and build a new system. I think it would go in the right direction. One last word, Rosa, if you allow. Let's take it away from inducements, go to the best interest of the client. Yeah, we always hear the argument that this focuses too much on the costs, and that may lead clients to prioritize the cheapest products. I think it's not true. But let me say one thing, lowering costs is absolutely necessary. Better Finance publishes each year a study on the real return of funds, and of course there is a correlation of the fees and on the returns. So consumers need to get a fairer deal, otherwise, and that's again a citation from McGuinness, the boost in retail participation might end up in a boost in litigation and old age poverty. And best interest of the client test does not require advisors to give and offer the cheapest product, but the most cost efficient. And I think we should keep this in mind when we go forward.
Thank you very much, Jela. You touch on very critical points of this strategy indeed, and it is very clear that to gain trust, one way is in that you feel that you have been well advised, right? And so this is very relevant, of course, the debate on inducements. But it is true that I like to kind of go a little bit beyond that topic, not only stay there, because there are also other things like the market access, the fragmentation of where these retail investors go. And in fact, one thing when discussing with some of you is that sometimes how much a debate can be wrapped up by one topic. We saw that, for instance, in MiFIR, etc. But I think this is a very broad topic. And now I turn into MEP André Kovarik. And André, in your particular case, also your political group has gotten the rapporteurship of this very relevant file. So I would like to get your preliminary views. I know they are preliminary, but how do you see this strategy, and what are the things that you like, and also which are the things that you think need to be improved?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. And first of all, thank you for the invitation and for possibility to speak on this panel on this very important topic. Also, as you said, my apologies, I would have to run before this panel ends to join a committee meeting. And yeah, maybe just following to what you have just said, I maybe should start with a disclaimer. Everything I would say, it will express only my personal views, not the views of my political group, not the views of my committee or the rapporteur of the file. I just want to state this clear. Because I think it's important not to get any misleading messages. But I mean, in general, I think it was really long time awaited and expected proposal from the Commission on the retail investment strategy. A lot of expectations, and I think I fully share your view. We should not end up this discussion just by focusing on. Can be very political and very controversial, but minor issues in my view. I think we should really look at this as a strategy. Strategy is a long-term policy. It should bring us from the situation that we currently know now through the appropriate tools and instruments to a situation that we would like to see in the future. And I think this is exactly how it should be seen. I think there's a number of issues that are included in it, and they really have value and have potential actually to enhance the investment culture and environment in Europe. I speak here about references to financial literacy, enhancing financial literacy, using new technologies, digital tools, for both for financial literacy, but also for some of the instruments and the requirements that are set in the strategy. But I think, I mean, if I can say maybe at the beginning what I would see in an ideal world in a strategy, I mean, it's very important to focus. And I think this is very much, our perspective to focus on building capital markets union. But if you want to make the retail investment strategy work for citizens, I mean, they don't care much about capital markets union, to be honest. I think they really care about the investment opportunities, about consumer protection, about availability and clarity and transparency of the service. And I think in this regard, because we discuss European retail investment strategy, possibility also to invest cross-border and make sure that they can actually tap into potential of the entire single market. And I think in this regard, that would be, in my view, the key issues that we should address. Sometimes it's very hard to address this with a specific piece of legislation. I fully agree, but I think we may be missing this global picture ahead of us while discussing these specific provisions. And I think on top of that, well, I come from a country where we currently discuss very much pension reforms, but I know we are not the only country in the European Union that is discussing it. I mean, for those of you who had the opportunity to travel to France these past months, it was always difficult to get your train connection or something else, because obviously there was a lot of discussions internally about the pension reform, and it's running across the EU. And I think really, if we want to achieve something meaningful with the investment strategy, we should also look into this complementary dimension, how we can use this as a complement to the pension reforms that are and the pension systems that are currently in place in Europe. And I think this should be more an invitation for reflection for further policy making. I mean, yeah, some issues were mentioned. I'm part of a group that used to be called liberal. We don't like bans. We don't like these issues. So I think in general, I think that we would be maybe we would need more discussion and consideration on how exactly the inducement issue with bans is done. But I think also a better look into and a better understanding of the new proposal of value for money and the benchmarks, whether this is something that really brings the expected transparency and clarity and actually better access to products for clients, or just increase potentially the reporting and other types of requirements, burdensome or administrative burdens on the provision of the services. Because, and that I will finish with this, I think in order to really go and achieve better investment environment in Europe, we should not only work on the retail side of the sector, so those who are actually on the side of demand, looking for services, looking for products, but we should also make sure that there is availability of products on the supply side. And I think this should be our balancing act that we should actually play, not only to protect consumers and potential investors, but also make sure that there's availability of products. And I think we had the case of Netherlands. I think just with the pure issue of inducement, I have my doubts whether the investment environment in Netherlands is really retail investment or if it's rather institutional investment environment as we see it today.
Thank you very much for these remarks, André. And I would like to turn to Bjorn from NASDAQ because I think it's very clear. I will not mention the US yet, because within the European Union, we do have a reality in which the retail investor base is quite integrated in capital markets. I mean, if we look at figures, the Nordics, and I know you also run the Baltics, do have a different behavior in which people access and how they really kind of feel that they can, you know, go into the capital markets from their mobiles, and it's always something that is quite shocking for those that we are living here in Belgium or my home country, Spain, and so on. So what is it that you have there that we could export, and how do you see that in relation to the strategy that the Commission has put forward?
Thank you, Rosa. And first of all, super important that we discuss retail investment. For me, this is so much more important than discussing the consolidated tape. If we really want to improve the capital market union, do better, it's much more important to discuss the engagement of retail investors versus a consolidated tape. So maybe next year, the starting agenda item should be retail investments and not in the end of the conference. So, but my story goes 15 years back. There was a lot of discussion in Stockholm, and I represent the markets in Sweden, Denmark, Finland, the 3 Baltic countries, and Iceland. So 15 years ago, there was a lot of discussion in Sweden around why do we need an exchange? There's few listings, the market does not really work. So in the best Swedish style, they love consensus. So our Swedish colleagues, the industry, pension funds, the online brokers, the local banks, NASDAQ, teamed up together and formed a concept around how do we activate retail investors. And the concept had quite many different dimensions, and I will not cover all of them, but I think one of the key important drivers was the introduction on an investment saving account. So basically the way it works is you put in your money at an account, all tax reporting is done by the bank, an online broker. The taxation is a holding tax, it is tiny, it is around 1% holding tax, and that boosted the market. So today, and the Swedish population is around 10 million, we have more than 3 million retail saving accounts covering this investment saving accounts. So 1/3 of the Swedish population, give and take, have a saving account. So this journey with that one started suddenly a boost on listings. And in 2021, we had more than 100 listings in Sweden. Many of them, more than 90% of them, were SME companies. All the companies we all talk about, we all love, that want to get access to capital, that want to grow, create jobs. We saw a boom in that. We've seen a boom for the last 5 years, mainly in Stockholm. And a key part of that was the investment saving accounts. Then when you have success on the investment saving accounts, you see increased activity by the banks in education. We spend a lot of time on financial education. Together with the industry, you see more in financial advisors, you see law firms being better and better, being smarter, cheaper, also the way you do prospectus, company descriptions. So it boosted the whole society around using the capital market, using the equity market to finance SME companies. And if you look at the stories today, so what happened is, and that's also, if you look at why do exchanges exist, we are here to help companies to grow. So small companies come to us, SME companies come to NASDAQ, we'll help them with liquidity, capital. They grow, they take the business plan, instead of only looking at Sweden, they take it into the European scene. They grow jobs 2 to 3 times more faster than similar companies. So they grow jobs, they grow economy in Sweden. So it has been a fantastic story. And when we saw this success in Sweden already after 5 years, we started similar journey in Denmark, Finland, the Baltic countries. We have now implemented in 2 of the Baltic countries. We did it in Finland. I'm Danish. I took the concept and went around to all political parties in Denmark And now this is the bad part of the story. And I went to all of them saying, we have this fantastic concept in Sweden. It is just go ahead and copy. If we really feel that retail is important for the capital market, this is the concept. And they looked at it and, yeah, we like the idea, blah, blah, blah. And we got 20% of the concept, right? And it's failing in Denmark. So we see companies in Denmark now list in Sweden because the capital market in Sweden functions so much better. We run both markets. It's the same setup, same rules, the same everything. But the political landscape, the political society were not willing to support it. So political support, execution is super, super important. And to give you just a little bit insight into the way it works. So a company, SME companies that want to raise, let's say, 20 million euros with us, quite often there's one or two anchor investors, pension funds or similar, and then we have probably, let's say, 500,000 retail investors. When it comes to capital raise, they are around 40% of the capital that is raised, more than 60% on the trading in the companies, small cap companies. So they play a super important part for liquidity, both raising capital, but also in the daily turnover. This is the success story in Sweden, and this is the model to do. So, of course, I could sit and hope for Brussels and Europe to help us, but this is actually an initiative that Sweden created by themselves, not sitting and waiting for help, support somewhere else, but actually action by the member states, by a local member state, but also by the finance industry. And this is my key point here. We have a model that works super well. It is actually just to copy and implement it across Europe. I tried to do it in Denmark, only succeeded half the way, so more to come there. But this is basically the success story, and this is the way for Europe to really active retail investors. And think about it. We also talk about financial education, but the dream for me is also having retail investors being a part of investing into new Google. Why should it only be pension funds or private equities? If you give retail investors the chance to invest in 10 fantastic new startup companies, yes, one or two of them will die. They're young companies, that's what happens. But if they can be a part of a new Google or something similar, that's a fantastic story. And they should have equal access to being part of that journey like the professional investors.
Thank you, Bjorn. I completely agree that this is a success story. And I think one thing that you mentioned is the compromise, the buy-in from the entire ecosystem. So coming from the head of state, let's say, I mean politicians in these jurisdictions, but also with the industry of the different parts of stakeholders really kind of getting together, having one objective and really trying to push it. And I think this is something that we heard already today in other areas of the blocks of these capital markets unions. I think it's a very important point to remember. But the thing is that if now we go back to the reality in the rest of Europe, what we see is that we lack investment culture. When we look at the statistics, only 17% of households and the assets that they have are invested in securities, compared in relative terms to 43% in the US. Financial literacy levels are quite low in many, many countries. And also we see, according to data from the Eurobarometer, that 45% of people think that they are not given good advice. So we go back a bit to this point on trust. Now, André, I would like to turn to you, also in the interest of time, so you really have enough time to express your views. But what do you think that we could do? What legislation could do? Also, not only from the perspective of your constituency, that you may probably have some observations there, but also with regards to cross-border. Do you think that is something that we could do also in that area?
Yes, definitely, and I think I'm really glad that the case of Sweden was mentioned here because, and well, we discussed Netherlands earlier before. I think this really shows that there are huge differences of, you know, whether we are not at the same starting point all across the EU single market, that there is actually different level of investment culture, there's different experience, different markets, and I think in my view, also the retail investment strategy, the European one, should take this the fact into account, because we see that some of the proposals are actually fit for those countries with well-developed capital markets and investment culture already. But I think we should really make sure that this can be something also for countries that are that already they may have capital market, but in a very early stage of development, or would require some more development to carry on. And I think this is one of the considerations that definitely that we should take into on our mind when dealing with the strategy. In terms of what we can do, as I said, I mean, I don't see that we can, arrange one particular piece of legislation and then make sure that now everything's working fine. I don't think this is exactly the case. I really believe in more enhanced cross-border access. Obviously, it's not always possible. It's not always clear. I mean, we will fight against competencies and subsidiarity issues, etc., etc. But I think this is exactly what can actually bring the advantages of the Capital Markets Union across the entire EU, so that there is an offer that is available to all clients, even for the markets that may not develop in the way that is the case in other member states. And we should actually look on what are the obstacles currently in place that may sort of hamper this development. But I think the key, as I said also, I mean, the key would be bringing some good examples and best practices. I mean, I fully agree. It's always difficult to copy paste, from one country to another. It would never work. But there's always a number of experiences that can be shared from one market to another. And if those good practices and best practices are working, then why not to develop them? Obviously, I think trust here is an important issue. I agree, but at the same time, as I said, I think we also should work on the supply side, so to make sure that there is a good access. And there is, I mean, obviously, with quality of advice, cost of advice, these are all relevant issues. We should look into transparency so that there is a clarity in it. But I think we should also look what are actually the expectations and the needs for the retail investors, and what level of engagement those retail investors expect to actually have. Some of them really would like to, be more active in various types of products. Some of them would really just look for, let's say, a very, very specific, simple, long-term investment product, like the one that we agreed under the review of LTIF recently, for instance. And so there are different types of investors, retail investors, different groups, and we should be able to cater for those needs and their preferences across the market. And as I said, maybe some of the national markets may not be equipped at this point with the product. So then, the consideration should be given: can we actually extend it also across the European Union? So that's because this is why we have the single market, and we always speak about the changes and advantages of the US, but we have to also remember that the way the US market works is somehow different compared to what we have in the EU with 27 member states in one single market.
Thank you very much, André. And in fact, when we look at this, the thing that Jela mentioned earlier on this study that Better Finance publishes on yearly basis on the different products that retailers are offered and what's the benefit that they make from them, we really see that there is something blocking the access. So I would like really to get the views from you, Jela, about that. What do you think that the people you represent feel about this access to these long-term products? And also, if you could elaborate a bit on this new concept about value for money, because I think it's been put there in the best intention, to really try to shed light and really show this. But do you think this is going to work?
First of all, I would like to invite Björn to Germany to meet with the politicians in Germany and convince them of a national initiative similar to Sweden, because we would really need it in Germany. No, but secondly, Rosa, coming back to your question, yeah, let me come back to value for money, because it's such an important concept. We like the proposed system of the rules, this product approval process. We welcome it as a step in the right direction. We have a little bit of concerns about how effective and how fast it is, because if we think that, or we have to take into consideration that ESMA and EIOPA has to develop benchmarks, first of all, this will take some time, so this will postpone again the implementation. We actually would much prefer a simpler system that shifts the burden of proof to the manufacturers, which means that they have to state what their benchmark is. All the active managers have a benchmark, and we should then hold them to account if their products do not perform their own benchmark. So I think there is a similar system already existing in the UK. The FCA has a system of name and shame of these funds. Maybe we should have a closer look at this too, because what we hear from the UK is that it's driving costs down, and that's a very, very important part for the investors. Financial education is always something, I mean, we talk about this for 30 years now. And yes, whatever we introduce in schools is not effective, to be very honest. And there is a rule that says before the age of 25, it's not, doesn't make sense at all, because that's the time when they have first time money, where they want to invest. Financial education of adults usually in Germany takes place at the point of sale. So actually it's the advisor, you know, who has to take care of it. Again, very important, the key information documents. And here we still see a room for improvement. And I think Alexandra also mentioned it, the information to investor should be transparent and comparable. If not, it doesn't really make sense for the investors. And we should not forget, when we talk about financial education, retail investing is not a full-time job for normal people. This should be up to the advisors, but not for the normal citizen.
Thank you very much, Jela. Now I would like to ask Marcel about you know, I'm sure, no, you invested a lot of time in preparing this strategy, thinking at many different things. As you said, you were only alone there, obviously with other units equally. And I'm sure you studied a bit these success stories as the one we just listened to, but probably also outside the EU. And obviously, the easy target here is to mention the US, but the US is a very different capital market, so I may not spend much time there, but also there are other jurisdictions that have quite integrated retail base. For instance, I was reading about Brazil, Asia. So what is it that you have seen that is a success, and how then this worked out when you try to impose it, or to kind of propose it, not to impose, to propose it in the European legislation? So also to elaborate a bit on the challenges that you had to face on good ideas.
Yeah, also that's a very tricky question. Thank you for that. Because as you mentioned before, we're not talking about, you know, a silver bullet, or, you know, this one thing that you have to change. We're not talking about banking union. We're talking about capital markets union here, and that means we are talking about an entire ecosystem that has to change, and that's also why we have a raft of measures and not, you know, one simple solution. If you look at the US, as I think Rainer wants to. Sorry. we look at the US, we have a very different environment, a very different investment culture. This is partly to do with the fact that, for instance, the pension system is a very different one. We are used to having essentially a pension system that is based on state pensions. So the average retail investor doesn't have to worry about making provisions for their old age, and so they don't. In the US, that is totally different. I mean, this is one of the things that we need to change with demographic change and with the increasing pension gap in our public finances. It also means that with the increased experience that retail investors in other jurisdictions have, they don't have to deal with the kind of trust and confidence issues that we have to deal with. And ultimately, where capital markets are more integrated, deeper, and more competitive, retail investors get a better deal. That's the case of the US, and then you enter in something like a virtuous circle, where more people are being drawn into the capital market, more people invest, more people get better results from better functioning capital markets, and at the end, everybody wins.
Thank you, Marcel. I very much like this concept of virtuous circle, because I think it's key in this entire debate, no? What is it the trigger that will make us all together? As Bjorn was mentioning, it's not only one part. I mean, it's the entire ecosystem that needs to buy in. Bjorn, now that you've listened, to also others and the different difficulties that other jurisdictions are facing, what is it in your view, when you look at the entire European Union, that is blocking this retail participation? And I would like also, maybe you could elaborate a bit also about the markets, the functioning of the markets.
Yeah, so first of all, let me highlight, I'm actually relatively bullish on the outlook for retail investment participation in the future. 20 years ago, I was running an online broker. And back then, it was difficult for retail to participate in the equity market. You had to call in your orders to a bank that put in the order. You had spread that was massive, right? And it was difficult to have transparency, best execution. We are living in a world now where I can basically sit on this panel, do a trade. I can see the way it's set up in the Nordics and in many other countries. I can actually see my order on the exchange. So it is transparent, it creates trust. I can send my order in less than 1 minute. My order is at the exchange. I can see it, I can change it. This is transparency, this is trust. And it does not cost me a lot, right? €1, €5, depends on where you trade. So I think actually we have come a long way. Where I see some of the challenges, payment for order flow. So what I love with the system we have today is, again, at least I speak for the Nordic market, but I know it's the same case for some of the other European markets. In the Nordics, more than 90% of all order flow, retail order flow, goes directly to the exchange. Right? You can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it. In US, where we have the US model with payment for order flow, that the order flow is sold by the online broker to high frequency firm X, and less than 10% of that flow goes to the exchange. For me, that's not transparency. For me, that's not necessarily ends up in best execution. If we do not have a ban in Europe on payment for order flow, I fear that a lot of the retail transparency, trust we have today will disappear. And again, back to my point around SME trading, where retail is 60% of the trading on a daily basis, 40% of the capital raise. If that retail order flow suddenly disappeared, sold to a high-frequency firm, we will start to be challenged on the SME growth. So a ban on payment for order flow is very important for me for the future European market. So that's one of the market structure discussion that is very important for me that we spend time on and also fight for. Education, I just want to touch upon that. Nasdaq, we are not fantastic on education. But what we try to do is we try to team up with firms that are super good at this. Whether it's the biggest online brokers in the Nordics, where they do the education, we help them, we provide the input, but they run the show. We do something with female invest, we do something with more private banking, where we do education on derivatives. So I think actually we are being a key part of the market infrastructure. We have a responsibility for educating, helping, educating on a low level, educating on a high level for young investors. So we spend a lot of time and money and effort on it, teaming up with the local community, and that's where it's a part of what we do, and it's our responsibility to do that as well. We also have a responsibility for also talking to the 1,200 listed companies we have in the Nordics to make sure that their information, their journey towards the retail investors is also something that is easy for the retail investors to understand. They are part of the journey, they have access to the information from the companies. So our job is not only educating retail investors, it's also educating the listed companies around how do you do information, how do you engage with retail investors, because this will become an even bigger part. And my third point is, the reason why I actually believe in the retail journey will become bigger and bigger. Retail investment will become bigger and bigger. During COVID, we saw an explosion in retail participation. Yes, it has dropped, but we are still higher than where we were before. So I see we have still a fantastic opportunity in front of us. One of the areas where I don't think we have really succeeded yet is in bond trading. So equity investing, yes, but bond trading, retail investors have not really embraced that. Why should they not invest in bonds as well? We have some challenges with less transparency, less access, more expensive, bigger clip sizes. So there are some areas where we can still do more around bonds, as an example.
Absolutely, Bjorn, and indeed you mentioned that it's true that we had an increase of people investing while we were in COVID, but maybe not in the right space, right? Because we really need to increase the pie of this equity culture, and that they really go, and I think it was very good the point about bridging the gap between the issuers and the retail investors. We've got a few questions from the audience, and in fact, one of them relates to already an idea I had, which is the fact that there are European elections next year in June, also based on the calendar that we heard about the Listing Act being likely concluded only in March next year. I assume that this strategy package will move into the next Commission mandate. Well, maybe I'm being here, I don't know, maybe if we are too optimistic that things go fast, maybe. I see Marcel expressing doubts, but okay, well, let's be optimistic, but well, anyhow, my point is also, we will see how the calendar goes, but my point goes also about some aspects that will probably be discussed and improved. And one thing that Bjorn mentioned was this ban on PFOF, and this relates, Jella, what you were mentioning about the advice. And I want to ask you, Jella, also probably to, in this round, what, in your opinion, needs to change from what is already proposed now?
Well, first of all, I agree with Björn that payment for order flow is just an inducement and nothing else. So we have a conflict of interest there, just as in other cases, and we should really do something against it. But I think the retail investment strategy is the one thing. It's a key element of what we are looking at, but we also see other things that should be taken care of. I think I just mentioned 3 things. I think what we need for the retail investor is an effective collective redress mechanism in Europe. We don't have it, and this is still something where we need to improve the situation. I just want to, I don't have to explain to you the Wirecard scandal in Germany, but at the end it was the retail investor, the shareholder, that was left out in this whole case, and that was a DAX 30 company. Also, I think we could do much more to invest more in the employee share ownership. I think this is a very good thing for all of us, because that's also a way you can learn financial education in real life. And the last point, and that's of course because I come from a shareholder association, I think it is just very important that we promote and further improve the engagement of the investor. And there I think modern technology can help. We should be able in the future to use our smartphone not only to buy stock, but also to vote, you know, to exercise all of my rights as a shareholder via my smartphone. And I think that's one of the opportunities of digitalization, and this should also be possible cross-border. I mean, we know from our studies from Better Finance that the current situation proves the contrary, because it's just very, very difficult to do something cross-border. But I'm optimist, like Marcel. I think we should go forward into this direction to improve.
Thank you, Jela. And now we need to wrap up, so to be on time, a few people need to catch a plane, but I would like to give the floor to Marcel for concluding remarks before we close this panel discussion.
Yeah, thank you. What shall I say? We need all stakeholders to help us push the retail investment strategy over the finishing line, and it would be great if that could be done still under this mandate. So March is the deadline. This will require a lot of discussion, but most importantly, the political will to get this done. I hope that we can get that support, and that the discussions around value for money and inducements will not obscure the other components of the package. That said, obviously the journey is not over with this package, so we will have to look at a number of issues then in the years to come. Think of pensions and the role that capital markets can play there. Obviously, here it's important that this discussion is led from the demand side and not from the supply side. So maybe this is not the best forum here to start that conversation. Think of taxation, where it is just crazy how difficult tax rules make it to make decent cross-border investments for retail investors. That's simply not okay. But think also about the use of technology, which is partly addressed in the re-strategy, but there is a lot of potential still in the use of technology, and that is something that we need to look into going forward. And then the discussion on conflict of interest is certainly not over with this package, and maybe I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Marcel. No, I think definitely you wrap it up very well. And I just hope that the dream I started with at the beginning realizes one day, and that we obviously get the support from member states to get this done, and we can see it. So thank you very much. You will agree with me to applaud this panel. Thank you so much.
I would ask the panelists maybe to take a quick picture in front of the banner. And just to wrap up and maybe to conclude the day, I have to say it was a very rich debate all over the day. I think in the morning we started with Rodrigo Bonaventura setting a little bit the sight on what we need to do in order to make a CMU work. He talked a bit about passion. He talked a bit about how ideas can attract capital, how we need to really be in there for the long run in order to revitalize our capital market, and that we are not in a good space when we look at competition. I think we heard from Ugo Bassi on all the things European Union is doing, and certainly Verena gave a very comprehensive speech of what is also in the supervisory space working and what is not working, and that we still have a lot of fragmentation. When we discussed on secondary markets, I think the picture was maybe not as rosy. I think there was agreement, yes, we have fragmentation, yes, we have a lot of problems being competitive, but there probably was a bit of disagreement between, I think, some of the regulators and the market people versus the policymakers, with Nicolas Beer, I think, giving a very passionate speech on what we need less and what we need more. I think this afternoon, yes, listing, certainly there's a lot of agreement on the Listing Act, and everybody wants to see that fast to materialize, but building ecosystems will be much more than just getting the Listing Act right. So certainly it doesn't stop there. And also this last panel, I have to say, was a bit in that vein, you know, where we're all optimistic retail will come and has to come, but certainly speeding up and giving citizens a good deal will empower them to participate in the growth of European enterprises, which ultimately, and that's also something we discuss in listing, help to maybe keep ideas and innovation and companies here in Europe and not make things go abroad. So I think overall, a lot to do, but I think a positive note maybe is that I heard in the end of the panel here, it is a long-term strategy, so we need to be in there for the long haul, but the panel said, and I think, Marcel, you said you're optimistic, and I think we need to be optimistic, but there's a lot of work ahead. Let me thank all the speakers of the day. Let me thank certainly our sponsors, Deutsche Börse, Nasdaq, Prague Stock Exchange, and Börse Stuttgart for helping us with this event today. Let me also thank the Hessen Landesvertretung, Friedrich von Heusinger, and Bernadette Seehafer and the entire team for hosting us here today. And last not least, let me thank the FESE team, Marian Caro, who did all the work of organizing that behind the scenes, and you have probably not seen her much, but she's been behind the scenes very active, and the team right there, and the entire team that has helped. So thank you for that, and thank you for Rosa for being, as always, a great sparring partner in putting this together. So have a nice evening. Drinks are outside.
And thank you, Rainer.